Relax, sis. We've got the money, right, Sarah? What are you talking about? She's got $100,000 in savings, so don't worry. Sarah, we're counting on you. No. My name is Sarah. I'm a 34-year-old office worker, and I've been married to my husband, Scene, for 10 years. We had our daughter shortly after we got married, so she'll be turning 10 this year. While I don't have any major complaints about my marriage, I do have some issues, particularly concerning money. My husband has a habit of spending excessively on his hobbies. It's not the amount that's the problem, but the frequency and lack of restraint. I insist that he contribute a minimum amount to the household finances, which covers most of our basic expenses like utilities and food. With the limited amount he provides, I've had to cut back on spending and cover rent, our daughter's school tuition, and save for her future education from my salary. That's where my financial dissatisfaction comes from. Another issue is the housework. Despite both of us working, Scene doesn't contribute to household chores. He often claims that if he does it, it'll take longer, using that as an excuse to avoid it. This has led to me handling all the housework on my own. When our daughter was born, Scene was reluctant to help with her care, fearing he might accidentally hurt her. So I ended up managing most of the parenting responsibilities as well. As I reflected on my marriage, I realized that I was quite dissatisfied with my husband. Despite this, we had been together for 10 years, and our daughter was growing up. I knew it wouldn't be wise to consider divorce, especially with her approaching puberty. I tried to convince myself that no marriage is perfect and that disagreements are part of any relationship. However, a recent event made me reconsider. The catalyst was my sister-in-law. One day, she showed up at my doorstep unexpectedly. Sarah, I'm really sorry, but I need to hide out here for a while. What's going on? I've had some trouble with my husband. Can I stay here for a bit? What happened with Ken? She didn't answer directly and kept avoiding the question. Her vague responses only deepened my concern and made me question everything. I wasn't convinced by her vague explanations, so I decided to wait for my husband to come home from work. He arrived around 8 p.m., and after we had put our daughter to bed, we all sat down for a conversation. My sister-in-law, my husband, and I. So what happened? I asked my sister-in-law. Ken suddenly snapped and told me he wants a divorce. What? I was shocked. Ken had always seemed like a sincere man, so the idea of him suddenly getting angry and asking for a divorce was surprising. Do you know why Ken got so angry? Why are you asking me that? I just find it hard to believe he gets so upset without a reason, I replied. I noticed my sister-in-law seemed anxious, which only made me more curious. Sarah, why have you been defending Ken all this time? Are you involved with him in some way? Of course not, I said, trying to stay calm. I doubt it, my husband interjected with a laugh. She doesn't have time for that, and besides, she always leaves her phone on the table. Though my husband's defense was meant to reassure me, it only added to my irritation. I was too busy with work, house chores, and raising the kids to have much time for my phone. I rushed to make dinner after work, barely glancing at my phone. In the end, my sister-in-law couldn't provide a clear reason for her husband's behavior, so my husband and I decided to speak with Ken directly. When Ken arrived at our house, my sister-in-law chose to stay away to avoid the awkwardness. Ken greeted us with a polite apology. I'm really sorry for causing you both so much trouble. I had always known him to be sincere and level-headed, so his sudden anger was surprising. Ken, why did you ask for a divorce? You've only been married for a year. Isn't that a bit extreme? There must be a reason. Ken explained. She spent all my money without my permission. Really? How much did you have saved? I asked, stunned. $50,000, Ken replied. My husband and I exchanged surprised glances. $50,000 in just 1 year. That's roughly $4,100 a month. Considering that Ken had been providing enough money from his income to cover living and other necessary expenses, it was baffling to think of such a large sum being spent. It turned out my sister-in-law had been using the money for her own entertainment. Given the situation, it was understandable why Ken was furious. Anyone in his position would be, and I could relate. It would be challenging to stay married to someone with such a reckless spending habit. Are you okay? I asked, noticing Ken's frustration. Yeah, I'm fine, Ken replied. I thought about my own husband's spending issues. It seemed clear that financial habits might run in the family. If she doesn't pay back the $50,000, you should consider divorcing her. You don't have kids, so it might be a good idea. As I nodded in agreement, my husband abruptly said, "Okay, I'll make sure my sister pays you back." I was taken aback by his certainty and didn't quite understand where his confidence came from. Ken, however, simply said, "I'd appreciate that." With the conversation settled, I decided to observe how things would unfold. After Ken left, my sister-in-law returned home. "What did he say?" I asked her. "He said I spent all his savings, $50,000. Oh, I used it for living expenses." I tried to explain to him, but he didn't understand. But Ken said he had a separate account for living expenses. My sister-in-law snapped. "You don't know anything, so just stay out of it," she added harshly. She had always had a tendency to belittle me. Honestly, I agreed with Ken. If my sister-in-law couldn't manage her finances responsibly, perhaps divorce was the best option. Ken had made it clear he would only forgive her if she paid back the $50,000. "How can I possibly pay that back? I'm just a housewife," she protested. "If you can't pay it back, then don't spend his money," I said firmly. "Well, sis, relax," my husband interjected. "We've got money, right, Sarah?" "What?" "She's got $100,000 in her savings, so don't worry." My sister-in-law's eyes widened with interest. "Sarah, how come you didn't tell me about this sooner?" I was taken aback. "Wait a minute. How did you know about my savings scene?" "That money was something I set aside for my future when I was single. After I got married and had a baby, I intended to use it for our daughter's tuition. I never mentioned it to you. I found out about it when I went to your parents' house," Scene explained. The revelation left me in a state of confusion and frustration. "It was in the second drawer of the closet in your room," Scene said. "You went through my things without my permission? That's unbelievable. We're married, for God's sake. Anyway, your sister-in-law is in trouble, so we need your savings." "What are you talking about? I'm not giving it to you. That money is for our daughter's education. There's no way I'm handing over $100,000 just like that." "You've got $100,000, so give her $50,000. "Huh? Then why don't you pay her instead?" "Whoever has it should pay." "Sarah, please help me. I'm in the middle of a divorce." "That's none of my business. It's all your fault." "That's terrible. You don't love your family. Love for you means money. Then I don't need that kind of family love. If you don't give me $50,000, I'll divorce you," Scene declared, pulling out the divorce papers from the drawer. "Oh, so you've been preparing for this?" "I had them ready in case something happened." "You've got a lot of nerve trying to get your way." "That's exactly what I want to say to you," Scene retorted, filling out the form. "I'm serious. We can divorce at any time." My sister-in-law grinned as she watched the confrontation unfold. "Well, I'll be one of your witnesses," my sister-in-law said, signing the form with a smirk. "You can either pay me $50,000 or get a divorce," she added. I was baffled by how they thought they could intimidate me. I decided to play along and let the moment pass. The next day, I brought my in-laws and Ken to my house. "Why are you here, Ken? And Mom and Dad, what's going on?" I asked. "We heard the whole story," Ken said. "Scene, don't embarrass yourself," his mother advised. "Sarah, I'm truly sorry about my foolish son and daughter," his father said. "Ken, we also owe you an apology," I said. "Why are you apologizing?" My sister-in-law snapped. "Shut up," her mother said sharply. "We went through your room and found a lot of brown bags and jewelry." "How did you find out?" I asked, stunned. "Ken asked me to look into it," she explained. "You've always had a habit of hiding things you bought from us since you were a child. I can't stay married to you after you lied about using the money for living expenses," Ken said. "I want you to pay back the $50,000 and get a divorce." "Oh no," my sister-in-law protested. "And Scene, you'll be getting a divorce too," Ken added. "What?" Scene exclaimed. "Sarah already filled out the divorce papers and I signed as a witness. We've already submitted them," Ken said firmly. "What? I won't allow this," Scene shouted. "Won't allow it? What are you talking about? You threatened divorce and demanded that someone who has nothing to do with this take on the debt. You're disgusting," Ken said angrily. "Sarah is my wife, not your property," he continued. "She's not born into your family. She's a stranger to you. and you should have more respect and care for her. When my parents-in-law confronted my husband with a solid argument, he hung his head, unable to respond. My sister-in-law seemed completely overwhelmed and just stood there silent. Thanks to my parents-in-law's intervention, the conversation went smoothly for both Ken and me, and we were able to finalize the divorce without any issues. My sister-in-law sold as many brand-name goods as she could, managing to pay back about $20,000. The remaining balance was covered by my parents-in-law, and she now has to repay them. Under their supervision, she works from morning till night in an effort to settle her debt. As for my ex-husband, I've requested child support. I heard that he now lives alone in a cheaper apartment, but his salary barely covers the rent, living expenses, and child support. Despite moving to a less expensive place, his habit of spending recklessly means he's always broke and has no savings.
The tension in the dining room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I sat across from Harlan, my estranged husband, trying to keep my emotions in check as he droned on about his grand plans. "This luxury rehab center is going to put our little town on the map," he proclaimed, that slimy grin plastered across his face. "I've got investors lining up to be a part of it." My hands clenched under the table. Of course, his big idea involved lining his own pockets, not caring whose lives he disrupted in the process. "But Harlan," I interjected, struggling to remain calm, "that farmhouse has been in my family for generations. My parents' whole lives were spent tending to that land. You can't just tear it down." Dax and Ivy, my teenage kids, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was the kind of drama no child should have to witness between their parents, but Harlan seemed oblivious to their discomfort. Harlan scoffed, fixing me with that conniving glare that made my skin crawl. "Your parents' legacy?" he spat. "More like a dilapidated money pit holding us back. I've got the chance to finally do something worthwhile with that property." My blood boiled at his cavalier dismissal of everything that house represented to me. My childhood, my roots, my parents' life's work. All he could see was dollar signs. "It's not just about money," I exploded, slamming my palm on the table. Dax and Ivy jumped in their seats. "That farmhouse is our family heritage. It means something." "Yeah?" Harlan's lips curled into a sneer. "Well, it's my name on the deed, which means I get to make the calls around here. This rehab center is happening whether you like it or not." Those words felt like a punch to the gut. When had the man I married become such a self-absorbed, greedy bastard? I opened my mouth to protest further, but the dejected looks on Dax and Ivy's faces stopped me. As much as I wanted to continue fighting, I didn't want to put them through any more of this toxic drama tonight. I pushed back from the table, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "You know what, Harlan? Do whatever you want, but don't expect any support from me on this." Snatching up my purse, I stormed out of the dining room, the muffled sound of Harlan's laughter echoing behind me. My fists clenched at my sides as I fought back angry tears. He thought he had won this battle, but he was gravely mistaken. That old farmhouse represented everything my parents had built through decades of backbreaking work, the roots, the memories, the soul of our family. I wouldn't stand by and let Harlan's greed destroy it all in the name of profiting off people's suffering. Not without one hell of a fight. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Harlan was being uncharacteristically low-key, no doubt trying to avoid another bloody-owning match after our disastrous dinner. But I knew that smug snake was just biding his time, waiting for the right moment to slither forward with his precious rehab center plans. I wasn't about to just sit back and take it, though. If he thought he could bulldoze over my family's legacy so easily, he had another thing coming. It started with little things at first. Reevaluating our finances, I noticed irregularities, strange transfers, payments to unfamiliar companies. Confronting Harlan only led to him lashing out, accusing me of nagging and not trusting him. "It's basic business dealings, Alara. Not that you'd understand anything about building an empire." Those words stung, but I tried not to let it show. "This has nothing to do with trust, Harlan. I'm simply asking where our money is going." He brushed me off with a demeaning chortle. "Don't worry that pretty little head of yours. Just let me handle things, okay, dear?" The way he always talked down to me, treating me like a clueless child rather than his wife, it made my blood boil. But I knew pushing further would only lead to another explosive argument. so I bottled up my anger. For now. Then came the night I overheard Harlan's conversation with his sleazeball buddy Travis. I'll never forget the smugness in his tone as he bragged about bleeding me dry. Once I've transferred the deed over solely to my name, Alara won't be able to do a damn thing. That little nuisance will be out of the picture for good. My heart stopped. He was planning on cutting me out completely, leaving me with nothing while he tore down my parents' legacy to build his tacky rehab palace. In that moment, any shed of respect or love I'd had left for Harlan evaporated. This was so much worse than I'd imagined. He wasn't just being greedy and inconsiderate, he was being malicious and cruel. Using our marriage vows as a weapon to steal from me and erase everything my family had built. I wanted nothing more than to burst into that room and unleash the fury building up inside me. To scream, to rage, to make him feel 1 ounce of the hurt he was inflicting on me. But I didn't. As the weight of Harlan's betrayal threatened to crush me, a strange calmness washed over me instead. Screaming would only give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under my skin. No, I would be strong. I would be smart. If he wanted to wage war, then war was what he'd get. Quietly, I retreated back down the hall before either of those snakes could spot me eavesdropping. They thought they were so clever, but they had no idea what was coming for them. A faint smile played across my lips as their chortling laughter echoed behind me. In that moment, I made a vow to myself. Using every ounce of my intelligence and determination, I would take that smug snake Harlan down. He wanted to play dirty? I'd bury him. The next morning, I called a family meeting with Dax and Ivy. It was time to lay everything out on the table and bring them into the fight. Your father has been lying to us, I stated bluntly as we gathered in the living room. He's been secretly plotting to take full control of the farmhouse property. Ivy's eyes widened in shock, but Dax just frowned and nodded slowly. I knew something shady was going on. I overheard him on the phone the other night arguing about handling the Alara situation. My heart clenched hearing my own name being treated like a mere obstacle to be overcome. Harlan's deceit cut deeper than I could have imagined. He's aiming to cut me out completely so he can demolish the farmhouse for his rehab center ambitions. Without any legal claim, there's nothing I can do to stop him. Dax slammed his fist on the couch cushion. That lying bastard! After everything you sacrificed for this family while he was off chasing get-rich-quick schemes, he doesn't deserve. He trailed off, anger causing his voice to shake. We can't let him get away with this, Ivy stated firmly, conviction burning in her eyes. Mom, that farmhouse is your heritage. Grandma and Grandpa's life was in those lands. We have to protect it. Hearing the determination in my daughter's voice, I felt a surge of pride mix with the simmering fury towards Harlan. She may have been young, but Ivy understood the importance of not letting our family history be erased. You're absolutely right, I declared, straightening my back. Which is why I need both of you on board with taking Harlan down. We're going to expose every last one of his underhanded tactics. Dax raised an eyebrow skeptically. And just how do you plan on doing that? Pretty sure dear old Dad has his shady business dealings locked up tighter than Fort Knox. A grim smile crossed my lips. Let's just say I have some tricks up my sleeve, too. Starting with carefully documenting every inconsistency I find in our finances, no matter how small, Harlan always was sloppy about covering his tracks completely. I proceeded to lay out the start of my plan, meticulously building an evidence trail of Harlan's financial manipulation, from questionable payments and transfers to the shady characters he was courting as rehab center investors. Dax was put in charge of thoroughly combing through all communication records, emails, texts, phone calls, looking for any trace of Harlan's deceitful intentions and dealings. Ivy, ever the tech genius, would backtrack all digital money movements to ensure we caught every inconsistency. With her skills, even Harlan's feeble efforts at coding expenses wouldn't be able to hide from us. As we finalized assigning roles and responsibilities, a new sense of determination filled the room. Harlan had clearly underestimated just how ferociously we would fight to take him down. Big mistake. This is going to be one hell of a battle, Dax mused grimly. I met his gaze, letting the full force of my resolve burn through. Then it's a good thing he messed with the wrong family. Harlan wanted a war. He'll get one he never saw coming. With a united front, we shook on our pact. There would be no more holding back. Harlan had awoken a vengeful force he couldn't possibly comprehend. Everything he'd worked towards was about to unravel by his own narcissistic greed. Let the games begin. A few days later, I finally worked up the nerve to confront Harlan directly about his betrayal. I'd spent too many nights stewing in anger, imagining all the ways I could rip him a new one. But I needed to play this confrontation carefully if I wanted to catch him off guard. "Harlan, we need to talk," I stated firmly as I entered the den, jaw clenched in determination. He barely looked up from his laptop, offering a dismissive grunt. "What is it now, Alara? I'm kind of busy here." I could feel my temper already starting to flare at his indifference, but I took a steadying breath. "Don't take the bait. Not yet." "Too busy to discuss your secret dealings to cut me out of the farmhouse deed?" I asked, carefully watching his expression. That seemed to finally get his attention. Harlan's head snapped up, his brow furrowing in that familiar look of faux innocence he used when caught in a lie. "What are you talking about? There are no secret dealings." I leveled him with a cold stare. "Don't play dumb with me, Harlan. I know all about your pathetic schemes to take full control of my family's property behind my back." For a split second, I saw a flicker of panic flash across his features before the mask of indignation slid back into place. "Alara, you're being completely irrational right now." "Can it, Harlan?" My composure finally snapped as I slammed my palms on the desk, causing him to flinch back in his chair. "I know you've been manipulating the finances, chatting up shady investors, all so you can demolish that farmhouse for your precious little vanity rehab project." Harlan opened his mouth, no doubt to spew more lies and feeble justifications. But I wasn't having any of it, not this time. "You make me sick," I snarled, all the rage and anguish I'd been bottling up finally boiling over. Planning to tear down a piece of my family's legacy all along, lying to my face every step of the way. "You're nothing but a selfish, immoral snake." He recoiled slightly at the venom in my words, then quickly straightened as that cocky, condescending sneer spread across his lips. Well, looks like the little woman has finally grown some claws. But you don't scare me, Alara. Not even close." Despite the bravado, I could detect a slight quiver of uncertainty in his voice. Good, he should be worried. "You think you've got everything all figured out, don't you?" Harlan leaned back with a contemptuous chuckle. "Newsflash, princess. I don't need your approval or permission to do anything with that property. It's mine, fair and square." My blood boiled at his arrogance. Did he really think underhanded manipulation made his claim fair? But before I could retort, he was leaning towards me with that soulless grin that made my skin crawl. "In fact, you're the one who's about to get a rude wake-up call," he promised in a low, silky tone. "I've got everything legally locked up tighter than a drum. By the time I'm through, you're going to be the one left with nothing while I build my empire." We were practically nose to nose now, his putrid breath washing over me as he hissed out the final threat. "You think you can take me on, sweetheart? By all means, try. But don't be surprised when I bury you along with your precious little memories. It's going to be a bloodbath, and I'm going to enjoy every second of watching you lose everything." Hatred burned in my chest, barely contained rage roiling within me at his vicious, vindictive words. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to unleash the full force of my fury upon this wretched, soulless man I'd once loved, but I didn't. Slowly, I straightened up and took a step back, returning his venom-filled glare with a calm, level look. "You seem pretty confident, don't you, Harlan?" I stated, my voice dangerously even. "We'll see how long that smug smile lasts once the truth about your shady dealings comes to light. You wanted a war? You're going to get one." Giving him one final look of pure, undisguised disgust, I turned and strode from the den, my high heels clicking determinedly against the hardwood. Harlan may have thought he held all the cards, but he had hugely underestimated me. The game was on now, and I fully intended to be the last one standing when the dust cleared. After my explosive showdown with Harlan, I knew I needed to take our fight to the next level. As much as Dax and Ivy's support bolstered my determination, we couldn't take Harlan down alone. We needed reinforcements. First on my list was my best friend Alicia, a sharp-tongued lawyer who had been watching this whole saga unfold with disdain for my snake of a husband. As expected, she jumped at the chance to help take Harlan down a peg. "That scumbag has had this coming for a long time," Alicia said with relish when I looped her in on our scheme. "Just tell me what kind of legal roadblocks we need to throw his way." Her wolfish grin was one I'd seen many times before, usually right before she went for the jugular in court. Harlan wouldn't know what hit him once we sicked Alicia's legal prowess on his shoddy cover-ups. Next, I reached out to some of my oldest friends from my nursing days, Jacqueline, Maria, and Sandy. While we had drifted apart over the years due to work and raising families, they were still the most loyal, iron-willed women I knew. When I laid out the battle plan, how Harlan aimed to destroy my family legacy in his ruthless pursuit of profits, their reactions were an awe-inspiring blend of outrage and grim determination. "Say no more, girl," Jacqueline stated, pulling me into a bear hug. "That bastard's not going to know what hit him when we're done rallying the troops." Sandy cracked her knuckles meaningfully. "I've been waiting years to give that smug prick a piece of my mind. Count me in." Maria simply nodded, her jaw set in a hard line. "Para la familia. Let's burn that cabron to the ground." With a fiercely loyal crew now assembled, the real planning began. We'd hit Harlan from every angle possible, Alicia laying the groundwork for our legal offensive, while Jacqueline and the others used their vast network of contacts in our small town to rally public opinion solidly against him. "Harlan may have his pockets lined with cash, but we've got the most powerful weapons of all, the truth and the will of the people," Alicia declared. "Once we expose every last one of his shady schemes, he won't be able to show his weaselly face in this town again." Over the next few days, the fight was taken to Harlan on all fronts. Damning documents and financial records detailing his fraud were anonymously leaked to the local press. Community meetings were organized to rally support for protecting my family's legacy at all costs against Harlan's ambitions. Scathing social media campaigns exposing what a con artist he truly was began spreading like wildfire. At the same time, Alicia was working every back door to halt permits and dispute property claims, throwing up every possible legal roadblock to Harlan's rehab center dreams while we dug up more concrete evidence of his lies and manipulation. As the townsfolk turned decisively against Harlan and his partners started growing nervous over the mounting allegations, you could practically smell the desperation rolling off that weasel. He knew he was losing his grip on the situation, but was too proud and arrogant to gracefully admit defeat. Which was exactly what we wanted. The slimy rat backed into a corner, scrabbling for any advantage as we slowly tightened the vice around his schemes. Of course, the attacks and libelous claims started flying once Harlan realized what an impenetrable defense we had formed. Cries of modern-day witch hunt and embellished accusations that I had grifted money in retaliation were aimed at trying to sow seeds of doubts, but we stood united against the onslaught. Harlan could grasp at whatever pitiful straws of denial he wanted. In a matter of days, we had already dismantled most of his rehab center plans while simultaneously turning almost the entire town against him. "He's getting desperate," I noted to Dax and Ivy as news dropped of another one of Harlan's investors pulling out amidst the cloud of suspicion. "Getting sloppy, too." My lips curved into a thin, predatory smile. "Which means his defenses are finally cracking open for our killing strike. Watch closely, kids. This is how we draw the venom from a snake before going in for the kill." The battle was far from over, but the war had finally swung in our favor, and I was going to savor every well-deserved second of Harlan's downfall. It all came to a head at the community center meeting Alicia had organized. Creating a media spectacle was her specialty, and this was shaping up to be her magnum opus of public lashings. As I entered the packed auditorium that night, the stuffy air was thick with anticipation and accusation. All eyes turned towards me, hushed murmurs filling the space as I made my way to the front. The townspeople had gotten wind that explosive revelations about Harlan were coming, and you could feel the thirst for blood in the air. I wasn't alone, however. Dax, Ivy, Alicia, and my former nursing crew stood in solidarity, shoulder to shoulder, as we ascended the stage. We were bathed in the harsh spotlight when I finally stepped up to the podium, casting shadows that danced ominously behind us. Without preamble, I launched right into my opening salvo. Good evening, everyone. I wish I could say I gathered you all here tonight under better circumstances, but the situation we are facing is one of great consequence. My eyes swept the crowd, taking in the rapt expressions locked onto me, before continuing in a voice that carried firmly to the rafters. Many of you are already aware of my husband Harlan's ambitions to demolish my family's ancestral farmhouse in order to build a luxury rehabilitation center. I paused, letting the weight of that statement hang in the air as cries of outrage rippled through the crowd. Seizing the momentum, I pressed on, voice rising with conviction. What you may not know are the depths of deceit, fraud, and manipulation Harlan stooped to in order to make this happen. Evidence we have uncovered shows a long pattern of shady dealings, underhanded tactics, and blatant lies, all in the name of lining his pockets at the expense of our community and my family's heritage. A hush fell over the auditorium as I reached into my blazer pocket and extracted a thick manila folder, holding it aloft for all to see. In here are documents, financial records, communication trails, all detailing Harlan's litany of moral and potentially criminal transgressions, from money laundering and backroom deals with known fraudsters, to pretending to be the sole owner of the property while actively working to cut me out and dissolve my legal claim. Gasps and murmurs exploded around the auditorium, shock and disdain on every face. I pressed my advantage, pitching my voice to be heard over the din. This man is a charlatan and a criminal who has lied, deceived, and undermined every step of the way in his blind greed. Are we going to let his toxicity ravage the very soul of our community while he gets away with it? No. The crowd roared as one, a deafening chorus of outrage. From the side of the stage, I saw Harlan finally stumble in, eyes wild and face flushed. He had clearly caught wind of our little truth rally and come to do damage control. Too little, far too late. "You lying bitch," he snarled as realization dawned, fight eyes bulging. "You can't do this. I'll bury you for this, I swear." "Save it, Snake." Alicia's voice cut through the commotion like a whip crack as she strode forward, holding up a hand to silence the angry mob. "We've got you dead to rights on a laundry list of charges. From shady business dealings to criminal fraud, you're going to be lucky if you don't end up in prison after this is through." Harlan looked around wildly, seeming to finally grasp just how tenuous his situation had become. I watched with cold satisfaction as the blood drained from his face. "Give it up, Harlan," I stated, my voice dripping with contempt. "Your shit show of lies and deception is over. The jig is up. Everyone can see you for the duplicitous, bottom-feeding scumbag you truly are." His mouth worked uselessly for a moment before snarling, pointed a quivering finger at me. You'll regret this, Alara, you hear me? This isn't over by a long shot." But his threats rang hollow, drowned out by a thunderous wave of boos and jeers cascading from the enraged townsfolk. As security finally arrived to escort the ranting Harlan away, I stood tall and fixed him with a look of pure, undisguised loathing. I had dismantled every last one of his lies and defenses. For the first time, he was utterly defenseless against the consequences of his villainy, and I was going to savor every damn second of his well-deserved downfall. After the explosive community meeting, Harlan's world came crashing down in spectacular fashion. You didn't need a crystal ball to see the karmic reckoning that was barreling towards that contemptible snake. Within days, the avalanche of press coverage exposing his vast array of fraud and deception caused a catastrophic domino effect. Investors and business partners scattered like roaches, suspending dealings and distancing themselves from the deepening pit of scandal. Banks froze his assets and lines of credit pending multiple investigations. The rehab center project laid in ruins, all permits revoked amidst the firestorm. And that was just the financial devastation. As the lurid allegations piled up, everything from laundering money for offshore drug cartels to funneling bribes through phony construction funds, the legal walls closed in with terrifying swiftness. Furious investors filed a wave of lawsuits demanding Harlan's head, while the district attorney's office secured a grand jury indictment on nearly 24 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and more. You could practically smell the stench of desperation emanating from Harlan as it all unraveled before his eyes, thanks to his own rampant arrogance and greed. "You'll pay for this, Alara," he'd frequently screech at me in chilling displays of rage, spittle flying. "You'll rue the day you started this war. I'll make sure you end up destitute and alone, living in that piece of crap farmhouse." All I could do was sneer back at his pathetic flailings, enjoying every agonizing second of his meltdown. "Is that so?" I'd reply calmly, basking in his manic fury. "Last I checked, I'm the one who still has custody of the kids, financial security, and the deed to that crap farmhouse you were ready to demolish. You, on the other hand..." I leaned back, eyeing his disheveled, unraveling appearance. "Well, you seem to be doing a fine job of self-destructing all on your own." I'd leave him to stew in his own toxic cesspool of hatred while I moved full steam ahead with reclaiming my family legacy. With Harlan's nefarious ambitions now a smoldering wreckage, it was full steam ahead on restoring the precious farmhouse to its former glory, to honor my parents' memory and provide a revitalizing community gathering place. Of course, Harlan tried every desperate gambit imaginable to regain some semblance of leverage or control. Mostly pathetic smear tactics and attempts to turn Dax and Ivy against me through vile manipulation. But his venom had lost its bite. The kids saw him for the soulless, morally bankrupt specimen he truly was. In the end, his towering ego crippled him when it came time to negotiate custody and divorce terms. While my team played hardball to rightfully secure nearly everything, Harlan was too poisoned by spite to make any logical capitulations. He pathetically tried to contest Alicia's ironclad case for how much punishment he deserved, ranting and raving about unfair treatment as each ruling systematically stripped him of money, property, and professional clout. I'd be lying if I said I didn't take immense satisfaction in watching that surly worm finally receive his comeuppance. It was nothing less than he deserved after so selfishly trying to burn down my family's treasured history in his warpath of greed and vanity. As for me, I rebounded splendidly from the wreckage Harlan left behind. Thanks to the groundswell of local support and Alicia's legal mastery, my claim to the farmhouse was solidified while my nursing credentials remained unblemished. The perfect foundation on which to execute my new vision for the revered property. With the community's help, the farmhouse underwent a transformation into a rustic but vibrant wellness center, offering holistic services, community events, and opportunities for local youth to connect with their rural heritage. A living embodiment of the values my parents instilled in me, allowing their hard-won legacy to be reborn into something even more meaningful. As for Harlan, his fall from grace was as brutal as it was deserved. The walls finally closed in with an 18-year prison sentence after his high-profile trial laid bare the full extent of his sociopathic depravity. His professional reputation was left in permanent ruin, reduced to a cautionary tale. One final delicious bit of karma? Dax and Ivy leveled him with chilling silence when he tried to grovel for their sympathies with smarmy calls from prison, the once infallible master manipulator unable to wriggle his way back into their good graces. After everything, that smug, soulless charlatan got exactly what he deserved, a life torn asunder by his own corrosive deceptions and greed. While I had risen from the rubble he tried to leave me in, creating new hopes and dreams from the foundations he aimed to destroy. Perhaps there was such a thing as justice and karma in this world, after all. All it took was the unstoppable force of a mother's love, fueled by the righteous determination to protect her family's sacred legacy. It was a crisp autumn morning when we held the grand reopening ceremony for the revitalized farmhouse, now christened Willow Creek Wellness Center. Though Harlan's scorched earth campaign had left the property in desperate need of repairs and renovations, we had persevered to breathe new life into my family's cherished legacy. As I stepped up to the podium that day, surrounded by the beaming faces of the townspeople who had rallied behind me, I couldn't help but feel immense pride at what we had achieved together. This wasn't just a new chapter, but a hard-won resurrection from the ashes of Harlan's selfish ambition. To all of you here today, words can't express how grateful I am for your support over these past months, I began, my voice wavering slightly with emotion. When faced with the very real threat of seeing this farmhouse, a piece of my family's heart and soul, torn asunder in the name of greed, you stood united. You stood for the importance of preserving our community's history and values. I paused, feeling Dax and Ivy's reassuring presence beside me as the crowd cheered their affirmation. In that moment, the nightmare of Harlan's betrayal felt like a distant specter, no longer able to diminish this hard-fought victory. Thanks to your resilience and refusal to let corporate excess trample on what makes this town great, we have reclaimed this invaluable space, I continued, fresh conviction rising in my voice. No longer will it serve as a monument to one man's ego, but as a place of healing, of unity, of rediscovering our roots. Willow Creek will be our community's lighthouse, a sanctuary where we can reconnect with ourselves, our neighbors, and the unbreakable threads that have bound us together for generations. More roars of approval and thunderous applause. Despite Harlan throwing everything he had at trying to divide and conquer us, his scorched earth tactics had only galvanized the community's strength and resolve. Karma indeed was a harsh mistress. After the ribbon cutting, I took time to greet and personally thank as many well-wishers as possible. From Alicia, whose legal prowess had been invaluable, to Jacqueline and my other nurses-turned-warriors on the front lines, so many rallied to this cause when Harlan thought he could steamroll right over my family's legacy. Speaking of that wretched snake, I couldn't help but smirk thinking about how he was spending this beautiful day. Rotting in a dingy cell, I'd wager, still trying in vain to wrap his mind around how I'd outmaneuvered him at every single turn. Let him stew and boil over with hatred. I had emerged from his smear campaign completely vindicated, stronger than ever before. And surrounding me now was a living, breathing symbol of that, the culmination of my parents' lifelong efforts and my own perseverance in the face of cruelty. He never stood a chance against you, did he? I turned to see Dax watching me with an odd look of contemplation, perhaps sensing where my mind had drifted. Before I could reply, Ivy sidled up and playfully nudged her brother. Are you kidding? I figured Mom would bury that jackass from the moment his stupid scheme came to light. Oh, ye of little faith, I chuckled, pulling them both into a tight embrace. To be fair, even I wasn't certain I had the fortitude at first to wage this war. But when I saw the two of you standing by me without hesitation, everything became clear. I pulled back, holding them at arm's length as memories of those initial dark days flashed in my mind's eye. When Harlan's true nature was laid bare, when he tried to strip me of my identity and destroy everything our family holds dear, that was when I knew this fight was about so much more than just a property deed. It was about not letting that soulless parasite kill the spirit and legacy your grandparents bestowed on me. Dax and Ivy exchanged knowing looks, seeming to gain a deeper understanding of the cataclysmic forces that had been unleashed. I may have dealt the decisive blows, I continued solemnly, but it was our united front as a family that gave me the strength and determination to dismantle his poisonous schemes piece by piece. Without you two by my side, righting Harlan's wrongs may have broken me. For a long moment we stood in silence, a tear glistening at the corner of my eye as I absorbed the symbolic weight of the sprawling farmhouse campus surrounding us. It would never again serve as a monument to greed, consumed by one man's vanity. No, this place had been reborn, a living, breathing embodiment of the values that could never be erased, no matter how viciously they were attacked. It stood as testament to the unbreakable endurance of family, of truth, and of carving our own legacies in defiance of those who tried to steal them away. And I couldn't have asked for a greater triumph to call my own. The shattering of glass pierced the silence of our living room. A framed photo lay smashed on the hardwood floor, the shards of glass glinting like tiny daggers. My hands trembled as I stared at the intruder standing before me, a woman clutching the hand of a young boy, his eyes wide with confusion. Richard, my husband of 23 years, stepped forward, his face ashen. Dana, this is Jenna, and Lucas. They're my family, too. The words hung in the air, a suffocating weight pressing against my chest. I opened my mouth, but no sound escaped. How could this be happening? My perfect life, the life I had fought so hard to build, was crumbling before my eyes. You have another family? I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. How could you do this to us? Richard's gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet mine. I'm sorry, Dana. I never meant for it to go this far. Jenna shifted uncomfortably, her grip on Lucas tightening. Richard told me you knew about us. He said you were okay with the arrangement. My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to comprehend the depth of his deception. Anger surged through me, burning away the shock. You lied to her too? You're a coward, Richard. A coward and a liar. Amelia, our 22-year-old daughter, emerged from her bedroom, her eyes wide with confusion. Mom, what's going on? Before I could respond, Richard stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Amelia, honey, I have something to tell you. Save it, I snapped, my voice trembling with rage. You've done enough damage. Get out of our house, Richard. Get out and never come back. Amelia's brow furrowed, and she looked from me to Richard, her gaze finally settling on Jenna and the child. Understanding dawned on her face, and her expression hardened. You sick bastard, she spat, her words dripping with venom. Richard flinched as if struck. Amelia, please, let me explain. No, I shouted, my voice raw. You don't get to explain anything. You've been living a lie, and now the truth is out. You made your choices, Richard, and now you have to face the consequences. Jenna's grip on Lucas loosened, and she took a tentative step forward. Dana, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Just go. Take your son and get out of my house. I don't want to see either of you ever again. Tears welled in Jenna's eyes, but she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She turned and fled, Lucas trailing behind her, casting one last bewildered glance over his shoulder. Richard stood motionless, his face a mask of anguish. Dana, please, we can work through this. I love you. I shook my head, my heart shattering with each word. No, Richard, you lost the right to love me the moment you betrayed our family. Our marriage is over. As the weight of my words settled over us, a heavy silence descended. In that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The life I had known, the love I had cherished, was gone, shattered like the broken frame on the floor. The weeks following Richard's departure were a blur. Amelia and I existed in a state of numb disbelief, the weight of his betrayal suffocating us with each passing day. We tried to resume our normal routines, but the empty spaces he left behind served as constant reminders of the life we had lost. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring vacantly at a stack of unpaid bills, Amelia emerged from her room, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Mom, we need to talk, she said, her voice quivering with barely contained anger. I looked up, my heart sinking at the expression on her face. What is it, honey? Amelia tossed a thick manila envelope onto the table, scattering the bills. I found this in Dad's office. It's everything. Bank statements, credit card receipts, proof of his double life. I reached for the envelope with trembling hands, dread coiling in my stomach. As I rifled through the contents, a sickening realization dawned on me. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been embezzling from his company, siphoning funds to support his secret family. That bastard, Amelia spat, her fists clenched at her sides. He's been lying to us for years, Mom. He's been stealing, cheating, and God knows what else. I felt bile rise in my throat as the full extent of Richard's deception became clear. How could he do this to us? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Amelia's expression hardened, her eyes blazing with determination. He's going to pay for this, Mom. We're going to make sure he pays. I stared at her, uncertainty gnawing at me. What are you saying, Amelia? She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. I'm saying we expose him for the lying, thieving scumbag he is. We take all this evidence to his company, to the police. We burn his life to the ground, just like he did to ours. A part of me recoiled at the thought of such vengeance, but another, darker part couldn't deny the appeal of seeing Richard suffer the consequences of his actions. What about Jenna and the kid? I asked, my voice trembling. They're caught up in this, too. Amelia's expression softened, just for a moment. We'll reach out to Jenna. Maybe she'll see reason and help us take him down. I nodded slowly, my mind whirling with 1,000 different thoughts and emotions. Okay, I said finally, my resolve hardening. We'll do it. We'll make him pay for what he's done. Amelia's grim smile sent a shiver down my spine. Good. It's time we showed that lying piece of garbage what happens when you mess with the Whittaker women. As she turned and stalked back to her room, I couldn't help but wonder if we were embarking on a path we might one day regret. But in that moment, all I could feel was a burning desire for retribution. A need to see Richard suffer as we had suffered, to make him pay for the lies that had shattered our lives. In the days that followed, I found myself standing at a crossroads, torn between the desire for vengeance and the fear of diving headlong into a path of destruction. As I pored over the evidence Amelia had uncovered, the weight of Richard's betrayal threatened to crush me. Amelia, however, remained resolute, her determination unwavering. "We can't let him get away with this, Mom," she insisted, her voice laced with urgency. "He needs to face the consequences of his actions." I nodded numbly, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. A part of me longed to see Richard suffer, to watch as his carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. But another part, the part that still clung to the remnants of the love I once felt, recoiled at the thought of such vindictiveness. "What if we go too far?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if we become the monsters we're trying to destroy?" Amelia's expression softened, and she reached across the table to grip my hand. "Mom, we're not the ones who created this mess. We're just fighting to reclaim what's ours, our dignity, our self-respect. Richard is the one who chose to lie and cheat. He's the monster here." Her words resonated deep within me, igniting a spark of determination that had been flickering dangerously close to extinguishment. She was right. Richard had brought this upon himself, and it was time he faced the music. "You're right," I said, squeezing her hand. "We can't let him get away with this. We need to take him down, once and for all." Amelia's eyes gleamed with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Good, then let's get to work." Over the next few days, we pored over the evidence, meticulously piecing together a timeline of Richard's deceit. Bank statements, credit card receipts, and damning emails painted a picture of a man consumed by greed and selfishness, willing to sacrifice everything, including his family, for his own desires. As we worked, I could feel the anger simmering within me, a slow burn that threatened to consume me if left unchecked. Each new revelation, each fresh betrayal, stoked the flames of my fury until I could barely contain the rage that coursed through my veins. Finally, we had everything we needed, a damning dossier of Richard's misdeeds, a veritable mountain of evidence that would bury him beneath the weight of his own lies. "It's time," Amelia said, her voice steely with determination. "Time to make that bastard pay." I nodded, my jaw clenched tight. Yes, it's time to end this, once and for all. As we stood there, united in our quest for retribution, I knew there was no turning back. Richard had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences, no matter how steep the price. With our dossier of evidence against Richard firmly in hand, Amelia and I knew it was time to take action. We couldn't move forward alone, not if we wanted to ensure Richard faced the full weight of his crimes. "We need help," Amelia said grimly, her fingers drumming against the tabletop. "Legal help." I nodded, my stomach churning with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. "You're right. We'll need an attorney, someone who can navigate the legal system and make sure Richard can't wriggle his way out of this." Amelia's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in a hard line. "I know just the person." A few days later, we found ourselves seated across from Samantha Kendrick, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for taking on high-profile cases. As we laid out the evidence before her, her expression remained inscrutable, betraying none of the shock or disgust we had expected. "This is quite a dossier," she said at last, her voice calm and measured. "If even half of these allegations are true, your husband is in deep trouble." Amelia leaned forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Every single word is true, Miss Kendrick. That lying, cheating scumbag has been deceiving us for years, stealing from his company to fund his double life." Samantha held up a hand, silencing Amelia's outburst. "I believe you, Miss Whitaker. But belief alone won't be enough to convict your husband. We'll need concrete evidence, a paper trail that leaves no doubt as to his guilt." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "We understand. What do you need from us?" Over the next few weeks, Samantha guided us through the process of collecting additional evidence, ensuring that every I was dotted and every T was crossed. Her meticulous attention to detail was both reassuring and unsettling, a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation we found ourselves in. As our case against Richard grew stronger, Amelia and I faced another hurdle, the question of what to do about Jenna and her son, Lucas. They were collateral damage in Richard's web of lies, innocent victims caught up in his selfish scheme. "We should reach out to her," Amelia said one evening, her voice laced with a surprising note of compassion. She might be willing to help us, especially if it means protecting Lucas. I hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. What if she's loyal to Richard? What if she refuses to cooperate? Amelia's expression hardened. Then we'll have to find another way. But we owe it to ourselves and to her to at least try. In the end, Jenna proved to be an unexpected ally, her anger and hurt at Richard's deception eclipsing any lingering loyalty she might have felt. She provided us with a wealth of information, corroborating our evidence and filling in the gaps in Richard's carefully constructed lies. As the final pieces fell into place, a sense of grim determination settled over us. We had done everything in our power to ensure that Richard would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful or devastating they might be. "It's time," Samantha said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Time to bring him down." Amelia and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. There was no turning back now. The wheels of justice had been set in motion, and Richard's world was about to come crashing down around him. As the days ticked by, a sense of foreboding settled over our household. Despite our meticulous preparations, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. What if Richard somehow managed to evade justice? What if, after everything we'd been through, he still found a way to escape the consequences of his actions? Amelia, ever the voice of reason, brushed aside my concerns with a wave of her hand. "He's not getting away this time, Mom. We've got him dead to rights." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was as if a storm was brewing on the horizon, and we were caught in its inexorable path. My fears were confirmed one evening when Samantha called, her usually unflappable demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. "We may have a problem," she said without preamble. "I've received word that your husband is planning to flee the country." The news hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from my lungs. "What? When? How?" Samantha's voice was grim. "From what my sources tell me, he's been liquidating assets and making arrangements to leave the country within the next few days. He's taking Jenna and the boy with him." Anger surged through me, hot and pulsing. The coward was running, trying to escape the consequences of his actions just as we were closing in. "That lying, spineless bastard," Amelia snarled, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "He's not getting away that easily." I drew in a shaky breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "What do we do, Samantha? How do we stop him?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost picture Samantha weighing her options. "We move forward with our plan, but we do it now, before he has a chance to disappear. We confront him, hit him with everything we've got, the evidence, the charges, all of it. We take away his ability to run." Amelia nodded, her jaw set in a hard line. "Let's do it. I'll call Jenna, make sure she's on board." As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination washed over me. We were so close, so tantalizingly close to seeing Richard face the consequences of his actions. I couldn't, let him wriggle free, not after everything he'd put us through. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as we finalized our plans. Jenna, her loyalty to Richard long since evaporated, agreed to testify against him, providing a damning first-hand account of his deception and manipulation. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. As we made our way to Richard's office, the weight of the moment pressed down upon us like a physical force. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, of pain and anger, and a burning desire for justice. Samantha squeezed my arm reassuringly. "It's going to be okay," she murmured. "We've got this." I nodded, forcing a tight smile. "I know. It's time for Richard to face the music." As we stepped into the building, I could feel the storm gathering around us, the winds of change whipping at our backs. There was no turning back now. The only way out was through, and I was determined to see this through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. The tension in the air was palpable as we strode into Richard's office, our footsteps echoing like thunderclaps in the hushed stillness. Samantha took the lead, her shoulders squared and her gaze unwavering, while Amelia and I flanked her on either side, our faces set in grim determination. Richard looked up from his desk, his expression morphing from surprise to confusion to outright panic as he registered our presence. "Dana? Amelia? What's going on?" Before he could say another word, Samantha stepped forward, brandishing a thick manila envelope. "Richard Whittaker, you're under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and adultery." The color drained from Richard's face as the weight of Samantha's words sank in. "What? That's absurd. You can't possibly believe these ridiculous accusations." Amelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Cut the crap, Dad. We know everything. The lies, the cheating, the secret family. It's all over." Richard's eyes darted back and forth, his mind clearly racing to concoct some new web of deception. "Jenna told you, didn't she? That lying little bee?" "Don't you dare!" I cut him off, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Don't you dare try to pin this on Jenna or anyone else. This is your doing, Richard. Your lies, your betrayal." Samantha stepped forward again, her expression impassive. "We have irrefutable evidence of your misdeeds, Mr. Whittaker. Bank statements, financial records, eyewitness testimony, all of it points to a pattern of embezzlement and fraud stretching back years." Richard's face contorted in a snarl of rage. "You think you can take me down with some flimsy evidence and trumped-up charges? I'll bury you all in lawsuits, you hear me? This isn't over, not by a long shot." Amelia's laughter was cold and derisive. "Keep telling yourself that, Dad. Your days of lying and cheating are over. You're finished." As if on cue, the door to Richard's office burst open, and a trio of stern-faced security guards entered, flanked by 2 police officers. "Richard Whittaker, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The world seemed to slow as the officers approached, their movements deliberate and inexorable. Richard's mask of bravado crumbled, his eyes widening in panic as the gravity of the situation finally sank in. "No, wait, you don't understand," he sputtered, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender. "This is all a mistake. Dana, please, you have to believe me." But his pleas fell on deaf ears as the officers seized him, roughly spinning him around and snapping the handcuffs into place. As they led him away, his gaze met mine, and for a fleeting moment I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved, the man who had promised to cherish and protect me, the man who had sworn to love me until the end of time. Then the moment passed, and all I saw was a stranger, a man consumed by greed and selfishness, a man who had sacrificed everything for his own twisted desires. And in that instant, I knew that the Richard what had loved was gone, lost forever in the tangled web of his own lies. As the door swung shut behind him, a profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the faint sound of Amelia's ragged breathing. We had done it. We had brought Richard Whittaker to his knees, exposed his lies for the world to see. But even as a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if the price we had paid was too high. Had our quest for vengeance cost us more than we could ever hope to regain? Only time would tell. In the aftermath of Richard's arrest, a surreal calm settled over our lives. After the whirlwind of emotions and the relentless pursuit of justice, the sudden stillness felt almost suffocating. Amelia and I sat in silence, staring at the now empty space where Richard's presence had once loomed large. It was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders, but in its place lingered a hollow ache, the echoes of a life we had once known, now forever altered. "Do you think it was worth it?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I considered her question, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle with no clear solution. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Part of me feels like we did the right thing, that he got what he deserved, but another part—" My voice trailed off, the words catching in my throat. Amelia nodded, her expression somber. "Yeah, I know what you mean." In the days that followed, we learned the full extent of Richard's betrayal. The embezzlement charges alone were staggering, with evidence suggesting he had siphoned off hundreds of thousands of dollars from his company over the years. But it was the personal revelations that cut deepest. The secret bank accounts, the hidden assets, the paper trail of lies that stretched back nearly a decade. Jenna, it seemed, had been just one in a long line of mistresses, a mere footnote in Richard's sordid chronicle of infidelity. And poor Lucas, that innocent child caught in the crossfire of his father's selfish actions, was left to pick up the pieces of a life he had never asked for. As the media frenzy swirled around us, Amelia and I retreated into ourselves, seeking solace in the quiet moments away from the prying eyes and endless questions. We had sacrificed so much in our pursuit of vengeance, and now that the dust had settled, we were left to confront the consequences of our choices. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jenna standing on the doorstep, her eyes rimmed with tears. "Dana," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." I blinked, taken aback by her unexpected gratitude. "Jenna, I don't know what to say." She shook her head, a sad smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You gave me the strength to break free, to see Richard for the monster he truly is. I'll never be able to repay that debt." As she turned to leave, I found my voice once more. "Jenna, wait." She paused, her eyes questioning. "What will you do now?" I asked. "With Lucas, I mean?" Jenna's expression hardened, a steely resolve settling over her features. "I'll raise him to be a better man than his father, to know the value of honesty, loyalty, and integrity. Richard may have given him life, but I'll make sure he never inherits his father's sins." With those words, she was gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk as abruptly as she had arrived. As I watched her retreating figure, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope amidst the lingering sadness and regret. Perhaps in the end our quest for vengeance had achieved something greater than mere retribution. Perhaps, by exposing Richard's lies and holding him accountable, we had created a ripple effect, a chance for others like Jenna and Lucas to break free from the chains of his deception and forge a better path forward. As the last rays of sunlight faded, casting long shadows across the room, I realized that our journey was far from over. The road ahead would be long and arduous, paved with difficult choices and painful realizations. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to believe that we might just make it through. Battered and bruised, perhaps, but stronger for having weathered the storm. The weeks following Richard's arrest were a whirlwind of chaos and change. As the legal proceedings ground on, Amelia and I found ourselves thrust into the harsh glare of the media spotlight, our private lives suddenly laid bare for the world to dissect and analyze. Through it all, we clung to each other, a united front against the storm of scrutiny and judgment that seemed to rage endlessly around us. Samantha, our steadfast ally, guided us through the legal quagmire, her unwavering presence a constant source of strength and support. "It won't be easy," she warned us, her expression grave. "Richard's lawyers will fight tooth and nail to discredit you, to paint you as vindictive and irrational. You need to be prepared for that." Amelia's jaw clenched, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. "Let them try. We have the truth on our side, and that's all that matters." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the weight of our decision began to take its toll. The sleepless nights, the endless questioning, the constant reminder of the life we had lost, it all threatened to crush us beneath its unbearable weight. But through it all, we persevered, buoyed by an unshakable belief that we had done the right thing. Richard's web of lies had been unraveled, his carefully constructed facade torn down brick by brick. He would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how long or arduous the road ahead might be. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day of reckoning arrived. Richard, his once confident demeanor replaced by a pallid, haunted expression, stood before the judge, his fate hanging in the balance. As the charges were read aloud, embezzlement, fraud, adultery, a hush fell over the courtroom. Even the most seasoned journalists and legal experts seemed taken aback by the sheer magnitude of his misdeeds. Amelia and I sat in the front row, our hands clasped together in a silent show of solidarity. Jenna was there too, her eyes fixed on Richard with a mixture of anger and pity. When the verdict was finally announced, guilty on all counts, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Richard's shoulders slumped, his head bowing in defeat as the weight of his sins finally came crashing down upon him. In the aftermath, as the media circus swirled around us once more, Amelia and I found ourselves clinging to each other, tears of relief and sorrow mingling on our cheeks. "It's over," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's finally over." I nodded, my throat constricted by a torrent of conflicting emotions. The road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. In the days and weeks that followed, we began to piece our lives back together, one fragile step at a time. Jenna, her custody of Lucas secured, reached out to us, and an unlikely bond of understanding began to form. We were survivors, united by the scars of Richard's betrayal, but determined to forge a new path forward. As for Richard, his fate was sealed. A lengthy prison sentence, his once promising future reduced to a mere footnote in the annals of his own hubris and greed. But even as the world around us moved on, the echoes of our ordeal lingered, a constant reminder of the price we had paid for justice. The road to healing would be long and arduous, paved with difficult choices and painful realizations. Yet, as I stood on the precipice of this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a belief that, no matter how dark the night might seem, the dawn would eventually break, ushering in a new era of peace and redemption. For in the end, that was the true legacy of our quest for vengeance. Not the destruction of one man, but the reclamation of our own strength, our own resilience, our own indomitable spirit. And as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the room, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to forge a brighter future, one built on the ashes of the past, but rising ever higher toward the promise of a new dawn. I should have known something was terribly wrong the moment Derek abruptly ended his phone call and shoved his cell into his pocket, his face taut with tension. My husband had been taking an abnormal number of private calls lately, always stepping away to murmur furtively like he had some big secret to hide. As he rejoined me on the living room couch, I studied his expression, trying to gauge his mood. "Everything okay, babe?" I ventured carefully. "You've seemed preoccupied lately." Derek avoided my gaze, letting out a strained chuckle. "It's nothing, Lena, just some dumb thing at work, that's all." His fingers tapped an agitated rhythm on the couch cushion as he forced a tight smile. "So what did you want to talk about?" Something in the pit of my stomach twisted sharply, warning me that he was hiding something serious. But I opted not to push further, at least not yet. "Well, I was hoping we could discuss our savings plan for the nursery remodel. Have you had a chance to look at the contractor quotes I emailed you?" His body stiffened, and those telltale worry lines creased his forehead. "About that," he began slowly, "I've been meaning to mention that I talked to my mom recently. She thinks we should hold off on the remodel for now." I blinked, struggling to comprehend. "What? Why would she say that?" A tendril of dread began unfurling in my chest. "She just thinks it's unwise to sink so much money into renovations with the way things are so uncertain right now," Derek said evasively. "The economy and all, you know. Maybe we should play it safe for a while." My pulse quickened as realization dawned. "Wait, does this have something to do with that big opportunity your mom wants you to invest in?" I demanded, unable to conceal the sharpness in my tone. "The one you two have been so secretive about." Derek frowned, suddenly looking dismayed, like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Now, Lena, don't get worked up. It's just a little side business venture that could really pay off big in the long run." "That little venture is blowing through our life savings behind my back." I shot back, anger and betrayal roiling inside me, while I'm over here thinking we're on the same team, planning for our baby's future. Lurching to my feet, I paced in short, agitated bursts, my voice rising in incredulous disbelief. "I can't believe you'd let your mother manipulate you into gambling away everything we've worked for, all for some shady get-rich-quick scheme she's peddling." Derek stood as well, palms raised in a placating gesture as he took a step towards me. "Lena, calm down, okay? You're overreacting. Mom knows what she's doing. This investment is rock solid. Once we get the payoff, we'll be sitting pretty. No more money worries." I stared at the man I'd naively thought was my loving partner, unable to recognize him in that moment. How could I have been so blind to the truth slowly unraveling before my eyes? As if on cue, Derek's phone buzzed again with another incoming call, no doubt from his manipulative puppet master. The harsh reality slammed into me with sickening clarity. My husband's heart and loyalty no longer belonged to me. Not really. I was just another piece on the board, another player for Evelyn to control and subjugate through her web of lies and scheme. and I had a terrible feeling that her games were only just beginning. The weeks that followed were a waking nightmare. Evelyn's rock-solid investment predictably imploded in spectacular fashion, draining our life savings in what amounted to an elaborate financial shakedown. As Derek broke the devastating news, the fury etched in his expression made it clear where he placed the blame. "I can't believe you let this happen," he erupted, spit flying. "If you had just been supportive instead of fighting me every step, none of this would have gone south." I gaped at him, stunned by the venom and audacity of his misdirected rage. Before I could formulate a reply, the doorbell rang with the shrill, incessant ringing that could only be Evelyn. Derek threw up his hands and stormed off to let his mother in. The moment she swept into the living room in a floral moo-moo, her beady eyes lasered in on me with piercing accusation. "Well, I should have known," she tutted, shaking her head slowly. "We had a good thing going, and you just couldn't keep your doubts to yourself, could you?" Bewildered, I opened and closed my mouth, momentarily robbed of speech. I never said anything to undermine." "Oh, don't play dumb with me, Lena," Evelyn sneered, waddling closer until I could smell her stale cream puff breath. "If you had been fully on board, lending your undivided support, my son's venture would have succeeded." Derek hovered behind his mother, nodding in sullen agreement. The sight of my own husband siding against me, drinking in his mother's toxic lies, was like a vice around my heart. I drew myself up as tall as I could manage, anger and defiance coursing through me. "That's a loop and you know it, Evelyn. This had nothing to do with me. The feds were onto your shady scheme from the start." Evelyn's eyes flashed with undisguised malice. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might actually strike me before she caught herself. Everything has gone wrong because of you," she seethed, jabbing her pink sausage finger aggressively into my chest. I flinched at the vehemence of her tirade, my hand instinctively cradling my still flat abdomen, protecting the life growing inside me. Derek regarded my gesture with apparent disdain. "Yeah, great going, Lena. Way to start our family off on the right track. Flat broke, all because you couldn't have a little faith in us." The cruelty and callousness of his words sliced deep. How had I fallen so far from the man I thought I knew? Trusted and loved, even? Before my tortured thoughts could run away from me, Evelyn's reedy cackle pierced the tension. "Oh, don't worry, Derry," she cooed, patting his arm in a show of oily reassurance. "This is just a temporary setback. We just need to rethink our strategy, that's all." Her flinty gaze settled on me again, glinting with an unmistakable malice. Whatever her twisted agenda entailed, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. I would never be free of Evelyn's manipulative venom. Not unless I fought back with every last ounce and cunning I could muster. As much as the prospect sickened me, I realized that only one of us would emerge victorious from the grim battle looming ahead. For the sake of my unborn child's future, I had no choice but to ensure that victory would belong to me. In a desperate bid to salvage what remained of my fracturing marriage, I suggested Derek and I look into couples counseling. To my surprise, he didn't immediately balk at the idea. "You know what? You might be onto something there," he said, tone uncharacteristically agreeable. "This whole mess has been really hard on both of us. Maybe having an objective third party could help get our relationship back on track." I nodded, tentatively hopeful at his willingness. "I think it's exactly what we need to work through this and move forward as partners. For the baby's sake." Derek's expression clouded briefly at the mention of the baby, that same flickering hesitation I'd noticed whenever our child came up. But he pasted on a reassuring smile. "You're absolutely right. I'll make some calls. See about setting up our first session." True to his word, Derek booked our initial counseling appointment for the following week. But in the days leading up to it, his behavior shifted once more into that unsettling realm of secrecy and preoccupation. My suspicions escalated when he abruptly announced a last-minute business trip that would conveniently span our entire therapy window. "You're just going to blow off counseling after I agreed to it?" I challenged him, unable to hide my dismay. "Derek, we can't keep avoiding our problems forever. That's what got us into this mess to begin with." He dismissed my protestations with an airy wave. "Relax. It's just a little golf weekend with some potential clients. But you know what? You're right. putting off counseling would be counterproductive. Why don't you come along? My brow furrowed with confusion. Come along? To your business trip? Sure. Could be fun. Derek replied with a disarming chuckle. We can use the resort's couples services, have some nice relaxing spa time while we're there. Maybe fit in a massage or two after my meetings each day. The jovial pitch put me immediately on guard. Derek acted entirely too eager, too polished in his sales patter. Like he was reciting from a carefully rehearsed script rather than being genuinely spontaneous. Against my better judgment, I hesitantly agreed to accompany him. Looking back, that singular lapse in discernment would ultimately serve as the tipping point that sent my life into irreversible freefall. The seaside resort we checked into appeared pleasant enough on its manicured surface. White sandy beaches, poolside cabanas, luxury spa amenities. But I couldn't shake an ominous pall lurking just beneath that postcard-ready facade. Those unshakable misgivings cemented into sheer dread when we made our way to the private bungalows where Derek claimed his meetings would be held. Because looming among the quaint cottages, her floral muumuu and pinched glower, unmistakable even from a distance, was the last person on earth I wanted to see right then. My scheming, conniving mother-in-law. And in that soul-withering moment when Derek's eyes met Evelyn's with a subtle, knowing nod, I realized too late that I had been lured into her latest trap, one from which there might be no escape. The hot, salty breeze stung my eyes as Derek and I approached the cluster of bungalows where Evelyn waited, her arms folded tightly in dissatisfied judgment. Several other figures milled about, solemn-faced men and women I didn't recognize. "What is this?" I hissed at Derek through a tight smile, desperately hoping this was all some misguided surprise he had planned. "Who are these people?" Before he could respond, Evelyn stepped forward, her expression a chilling mask of smug resolve. "Good, you're here," she said flatly. "We've been expecting you, Lena. It's time we had a long overdue reckoning." The words were ominous, layered with threatening undercurrents. My chest tightened as dread took hold. "Mother, maybe we should have some privacy to talk," Derek stammered, suddenly looking less certain than when we'd arrived. But Evelyn shushed him with a curt wave of her hand. "There will be no more talking in circles. We're done with niceties. It's time for the truth to finally come out, for Lena's own good." One of the other women, a stern-looking blonde in a pantsuit, cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should move this inside, where it will be contained." My heart pounded furiously as I was ushered into the nearest bungalow, sensing I had no choice but to cooperate, at least for now. The others filed in silently and arrayed themselves in a semicircle of hard-backed chairs facing a weathered love seat where I was instructed to sit. Evelyn assumed a position at the head of the makeshift assembly, her cold stare locking onto me. "You've been a source of negativity and strife from the moment you came into this family, Lena, poisoning my son's mind with your doubts and ingratitude time and again. It's why we currently find ourselves in such profound difficulties." The words seemed ludicrous, laughable in their sheer audacity, and yet they were delivered with such biting certainty that my rebuke withered on my lips. "Our objective today is to remedy that toxic influence through truth and accountability," Evelyn pressed on, undeterred. "We will persist until you acknowledge and confess your failings as a wife and soon-to-be mother. Only then can you atone and be reintegrated on the path of righteousness." The room blurred around me as the full, horrific realization crystallized. This wasn't merely some twisted reckoning in Evelyn's mind. It was a systematic attempt to break me, to strip away my identity and remake me in her own warped image. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. "You're the one who has poisoned this family," I spat out, struggling to keep my voice from shaking with rage and desperation. "With your lies and schemes, using Derek as your puppet to control me." "Lies?" Evelyn's eyes flashed with indignation. "The only lies here are the ones you've allowed into this family through your selfish resistance." In an instant, the others were on their feet, hurling their own accusations in a dizzying torrent of verbal lashings. I cringed back into the love seat as their voices rose in fervor, drowning me in wave after wave of recrimination and scorn. Somewhere in the chaos, Derek watched impassively, making no move to intercede or calm the escalating ambush, like a damning harbinger of where his true allegiances would forever lie, with his mother. no matter how depraved her manipulations. As the onslaught reached its fevered peak, something inside me fractured. I finally understood that there would be no victory for me here today, no matter how righteous my defiance. Not against these overwhelming forces arrayed to systematically deconstruct my sense of self. The only way to escape from this nightmare was to play along, to acquiesce in hopes of surviving long enough to strike back later when I held the advantage. To live to fight another day, as much as that singular thought lacerated my very soul, even if that day might never come. I have no idea how long the harrowing intervention lasted. Time seemed to blur and distort as hours of psychological torment blended together. All I knew was that by the end, I was left utterly depleted, slumped in the love seat while flecks of spittle dried on my skin. Evelyn sneered victoriously as she proclaimed the session concluded. "Get some rest, Lena. We'll reconvene in the morning to accept your full confession." Still shaking, I watched through hollow eyes as her cabal of cohorts filed out. Only Derek remained behind, not quite meeting my gaze. I should have stopped them," he mumbled, sounding more like a sullen teenager than a grown man. "But you have to admit, you brought a lot of this on yourself, antagonizing Mom at every turn." The words lanced through what little remained of my tattered self-worth. I wanted to lash out, to rage and scream at this pitiful excuse for a man, but the futility of it rendered me mute. Without another word, Derek turned and left me alone in the dimly lit bungalow, shutting the door with a dull thud of finality. The desolate quiet that followed was somehow more oppressive than the torrent of verbal assaults I'd just endured. I'm not sure how long I remained there in that emaciated husk of a state, dwelling in my despair. But at some point, a faint inner voice sparked to life, almost inaudible at first. "You cannot give up now, not when so much is at stake." The thought crystallized like a revelation, focusing my fracturing psyche. Because Derek and his wretched mother were right about one thing. They had underestimated me. Seen me as weak, as a broken spirit ready to surrender completely. But in that moment, I tapped into a reserve of strength from somewhere deep inside. The part of me that drew from a primal well, a maternal drive to safeguard the innocent life gestating within me. My child's life. Almost mechanically, I rose from the love seat and surveyed my surroundings with new alertness. A sliver of pre-dawn light filtered through the bungalow's bay window, illuminating the outline of a heavy wooden chair propped beneath the latch. A security measure, no doubt to keep me contained. Inching towards the chair, I hefted its solid weight experimentally before hoisting it up and slamming it squarely into the window. The glass fractured in a satisfying spray of shards. I bashed at it again and again, undeterred even as my knuckles grew slick with blood. Sharpened determination propelled me until I had created an opening wide enough to slip through. The cool caress of morning beach air danced across my clammy skin as I hauled myself over the sill and dropped gracelessly onto the sand below, wincing at the bite of stray shards. My escape was far from assured, but sheer adrenaline fortified my battered body with a potent second wind. I sprinted away from the bungalow as fast as my legs could carry me, following the faint illumination of the rising sun towards the unknown. Freedom was still just a fragile hope glimmering on the horizon, but it was a future I would fight like hell to claim, one painstaking step after another, no matter how daunting the odyssey ahead might be. For the sake of my child, merely surviving was no longer an option. I would find a way to fight back and win. The days and weeks after my harrowing escape from that nightmare resort passed in a blur. Staying one step ahead of Derek and Evelyn's efforts to track me down consumed every waking moment. I couldn't risk going to the authorities, not yet. With their wealth and influence, they would surely turn it into a vicious custody battle that I might not win in my current delicate condition. No, I needed to play this smarter, gather insurmountable evidence of their depravity first. My parents took me in without question, offering shelter and lending what financial support they could. It shamed me to put them at risk by involving them at all, but I was out of options. During those tense months, I meticulously compiled documentation of every step of Derek and Evelyn's duplicitous campaign against me. Financials, witness testimony, surveillance photos, anything and everything that could be leveraged. There was no margin for error. My case would need to be irrefutable. When my baby bump finally became unmistakable, Derek made his first attempt at contact since abandoning me at the resort. The message was lengthy, saccharine-laced with feigned contrition and platitudes about putting our difficulties behind us. But the underlying message was unmistakable. He and Evelyn were growing desperate to regain control. I was tempted, for a fleeting moment, to respond with a blistering rebuke and lay my cards on the table. But that would merely sacrifice my advantage while accomplishing nothing. So I remained silent and kept building my case. As expected, their efforts escalated from there. Evelyn's flying monkeys sniffed around my parents' home a few times until I was forced to relocate again. I caught strangers furtively trying to snap pictures of me on the street, no doubt seeking ammunition to support claims of my unfitness. The final straw came when a bulky man shoved an expired court summons into my hands outside the Ob-Gyn clinic following a checkup. The paper was meaningless, a fabricated ruse to rattle me, but it revealed just how far they were willing to go. If I didn't strike first, there was no limit to the damage they'd try to inflict when the baby arrived, which is why I swallowed my trepidation and sought out the best family law firm in the state. Sitting across from that cool-eyed senior partner, I finally laid out the entire sordid truth for the first time, holding nothing back. To their credit, the attorneys mastered their revulsion at the more horrific details, absorbing it all with clinical detachment. But I could see the calculated gears turning as they recognized the unbridled legal firestorm this case could unleash. Less than 48 hours later, Evelyn and Derek were slapped with a temporary restraining order and barrage of subpoenas, clawing back years of financial data, communications, and records pertaining to their corrosive scheme. The element of surprise was complete. They never saw it coming. When Derek frantically called to plead his case, I savored every syllable of his desperate, impotent blubbering. I imagined his mother going into conniptions, her deranged sense of entitlement crumbling. And in that moment I pitied them both in a way. Evelyn's scorched earth parenting, her vitriolic need to control those around her, had ultimately transformed her into precisely the monster unleashed upon me. And Derek's Faustian bargain had shackled him to that all-consuming toxicity. But pity is a grace they never once afforded me. The coming year would see my own hardships escalate in ways I could scarcely fathom. A new mother fighting tooth and nail, both as a protective parent and an impassioned legal combatant. But thanks to my resolve and strategic groundwork, I held the high ground. It was only a matter of time before karma inserted the final pieces to bring Derek and Evelyn's depraved ambition to its kneecap, and I would be lying if I said I didn't plan to savor every last minute. The months following my preemptive legal strike were a grinding gauntlet of litigation and personal attacks. Derek and Evelyn responded to my bombshell lawsuit with a vengeance, churning out lies and false allegations rapid fire. Fortunately, my own airtight documentation blunted the worst of their smear campaign. Still, having to counter increasingly outlandish claims about everything from faking my pregnancy to suffering from mental instability took a grueling toll. I was utterly drained by the time I finally gave birth to my son, Liam. That first moment, cradling his squirming little form, tears of joy and relief streaming down my face, remains the purest memory from that entire nightmare, uncorrupted by the toxicity swirling around us. For a few fleeting days, I allowed myself to soak in the splendor of new motherhood, letting the lingering stresses recede into the background. I knew the reprieve was temporary, but I selfishly safeguarded those moments as long as I could. The bubble burst when I was served with Derek's motion for emergency custody. The paperwork read like Evelyn's manifesto regurgitated in legalese, complete with florid claims that I had effectively kidnapped Liam and posed a danger to him unless he was immediately removed from my care. My own attorneys assured me the motion was little more than a delayed intimidation tactic aimed at sabotaging my case momentum. Still, I couldn't shake the bone-deep fear of having my infant son wrested from my arms. My dread only escalated when our first courtroom showdown landed me face-to-face with Derek and Evelyn once again. Their snarling contempt hit me like a physical force as the vitriol began spewing. "This pathetic fantasy has gone on quite long enough," Evelyn proclaimed with a dismissive sneer. "We tried putting you on the path to redemption, but you insist on resisting to the detriment of my grandson. This is no life for a child." I fought to keep my breathing steady, struggling against the instinct to lash out. My attorneys had prepped me extensively on not rising to their verbal baits. Derek took the baton, his glowering expression more hangdog than threatening. "Just let us bring Liam home where he belongs, Lena, with people who actually care about giving him a stable life. Not whatever this is." He made a vague, disparaging gesture which caused Evelyn to tut loudly in disgust. The well-choreographed good cop, bad cop routine was so transparent, so patently patronizing after all we had endured. "Do you ever stop to hear the deranged vitriol dribbling from your own mouths?" I said at last, adrenaline emboldening me. "We both know this has never truly been about Liam's well-being. It's about controlling anything and everything around you until it bends to your twisted demands." Evelyn started, her mouth working furiously as she prepared to unleash another volley of abuse. But the judge's stern gavel cut her off with an irritated clap. "Mrs. Bowen, that's more than enough," His Honor intoned firmly. "No further outbursts or I'll have the bailiffs remove you." Fuming, Evelyn subsided into seething silence. Derek appeared to shrink slightly, chastened by his failed ploy. For perhaps the first time in his life, he seemed to register just how frail their position had become. It was the first small but unmistakable shift in momentum, the start of their unraveling before an increasingly skeptical legal system. I left that day's proceedings holding Liam a little tighter, bolstered by the knowledge that their persecution was cracking at long last. There would undoubtedly be more horrors to come before the final rulings. But like an offshore storm finally breaking, I sensed their dark era of control over our lives had finally reached its apex. Soon, everything they'd sown through deceit and malice would begin reaping its most profound consequence. And this time, there would be no more mercy from me. Not after the depravities they'd inflicted on me and my child. This time, they would answer for it all and know true karma. The culmination finally arrived nearly a year to the day after my desperate escape from that nightmare resort getaway Evelyn had orchestrated. All the discovery maneuvering, pre-trial posturing, and failed sideshow motions led to this. A final, protracted court battle that would decide the fates of everyone involved. Derek and Evelyn's smugness had steadily eroded with each rebuffed attempt to regain leverage, but their defiance remained obstinate. I had to hand it to them. They played their losing hand with a zeal that bordered on delusional. When we entered the courthouse on that crisp October morning, Evelyn turned to sneer at me with her customary disdain. "Enjoy this circus while it lasts, you ungrateful shrew. Soon, the decent, stable world I've fought to preserve for my grandson will be restored." I said nothing, unwilling to justify her provocation with a response. My sole focus was getting Liam situated with the court-appointed guardian who would be supervising him throughout the grueling proceedings. The trial itself was every bit as drawn-out and emotionally grueling as expected. Evelyn's legal team launched salvo after salvo of character attacks, revisiting every perceived maternal shortcoming in grandiose detail. I sat stoically through it all, following my own attorney's impeccable guidance. I knew their scattershot smears wouldn't connect with the jurors, not with the overwhelming documentation and testimony we had marshaled. When it was finally time for me to take the stand, there was an unmistakable sense of shift in the courtroom atmosphere. 12 pairs of eyes followed my every measured movement, all preliminary biases and assumptions giving way to rapt attention. From there, I simply talked. Spoke plainly and honestly about the nightmare I'd endured at the hands of Derek and his venomous mother. I recounted the lies and manipulations in granular detail, leaving nothing out, no matter how unsavory. Evelyn thrashed indignantly at times until the judge threatened her with contempt. Derek sat motionless, eyes downcast, vaguely reminiscent of those first fitful moments when his self-delusions began cracking. I don't know how long I held the jury enthralled, but by the time I was let off the stand, there could be no ambiguity about the profound impact my testimony had made. Several jurors wore expressions of dismay and disbelief. They had witnessed evil firsthand. Derek and Evelyn's subsequent attempts to redeem their case took on a rote hollowness after that. Neither mustered any believable passion for their fabricated narratives, as if some deep part of them had finally acknowledged their descent into self-parody. The final blow landed when forensic accountants took the stand and meticulously detailed the RICO-laden financial fraud underpinning Evelyn's ill-fated business. Investment, my family's hard-earned life savings ruthlessly squandered. After that, the jury's deliberations were little more than a formality. In the end, I was awarded full custody of Liam as well as a substantial multi-million-dollar judgment against Evelyn and her syndicate of grifters. Derek's reputation and future career prospects were summarily annihilated. It was a complete legal massacre on a scale of humiliation even I had not foreseen. While I relished the delicious karmic karma of the moment, there was no sense of elation or relief when the verdicts came down. My gaze lingered on Derek as his pallid, haggard expression registered the devastating finality of it all. A grown man rendered infantile and broken on the altar of one woman's monstrous obsession with control. I thought maybe a shred of remorse might flicker across his face, some profound regret for having sacrificed everything to his mother's malignant influences. But his stare remained blank and empty, 2 decades of brainwashing too entrenched to ever overcome. "Have your victory, then, you spiteful witch," Evelyn hissed vehemently at me, mercifully concluding her reign of terror with one last sputtering outburst as the bailiffs led her away. "We'll see how long your house of lies stands when the truth about you inevitably surfaces." As the courtroom finally cleared out, I pulled Liam close and pressed my lips to the crown of his downy head. Looking into those innocent, adoring eyes, I knew I had emerged victorious. But it was a victory wrought from desperation and hardship, a rite of fire that had steeled me with an alloy resilience. No further vindictiveness or bitterness remained, only a bone-deep resolve to shepherd my son's life towards promise, at long last unshackled from Evelyn's corrosive reach. The ordeal had remade me, uncompromised and finely honed, to ensure Liam's future would be one of compassion and selfless purpose, and that would be the realest, most enduring justice of all. "What a joke!" Derek's mocking voice echoed through the hallway, shattering my world into pieces. "You really think that raggedy, upcycled garbage is going to sell? Wake up, sis. Raylan's living in a fantasy land." I froze, my heart pounding in my ears as I listened to my husband's scathing words, each one driving a fresh dagger into my soul. This wasn't some stranger criticizing my life's work. This was the man I'd loved and trusted, the father of my child. Harper's giggle cut through the stillness like a knife. "Mom's so delusional. She honestly believes people will pay top dollar for old rags sewn together." Tears stung my eyes as the weight of their betrayal crashed down upon me. How could they be so cruel, so dismissive of the passion that fueled every stitch, every design born from repurposed materials? My dream wasn't just some whimsical flight of fancy. It was a commitment to sustainability, to breathing new life into the discarded. As their laughter subsided, I slipped away, my mind racing with a torrent of emotions, hurt, anger, determination. For too long, I'd turned a blind eye to Derek's subtle jabs and Harper's growing resentment. But this was a line crossed, a violation of trust that could never be undone. Later that night, as Derek snored beside me, oblivious to the storm brewing within, I made a decision. No more playing the victim. No more allowing them to trample my dreams underfoot. If they wanted to see me as a joke, I'd give them a punchline they'd never forget. The next morning, I called my best friend, Elise, a former lawyer with a razor-sharp mind. She was the only person I could trust with the truth, and the only one who could help me fight back. "Elise, I need your help," I whispered, glancing over my shoulder to ensure Derek hadn't overheard. "Things with Derek, they're not what they seem." Her voice was a lifeline, a beacon of clarity in the chaos. "Tell me everything." And so I did, laying bare the years of emotional neglect, the financial misdeeds I'd uncovered, and the gut-wrenching betrayal that had shattered my world. With each word, I felt a weight lifting, replaced by a steely resolve to take back control of my life and my business. "We'll make him pay," Elise vowed, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "Every penny he stole, every insult he hurled, he'll answer for it all. Starting today, we document everything." As I hung up the phone, a newfound sense of purpose coursed through my veins. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but I was done being the punchline. It was time to rewrite the joke, and this time, I'd be the one delivering the cutting final line. Elise didn't waste any time. Within days, she'd formulated a meticulous plan to expose Derek's misdeeds and secure my financial future. First things first, she said during one of our clandestine meetings at a quiet cafe. We need to document every single transaction he's made using your business accounts. I nodded, pulling out a thick manila envelope stuffed with bank statements and financial records. I've been gathering evidence for months. Look at these numbers. He's been siphoning funds into his personal accounts, leaving me with just enough to keep the business afloat. Elise's brow furrowed as she flipped through the pages. That snake, he's been embezzling from you this whole time. It gets worse. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the next revelation. I overheard him on the phone with his banker last week. He's been lying about our profits, cooking the books to make it look like we're barely scraping by. So he can claim you're a financial burden and gain leverage in the divorce proceedings, Elise concluded, her jaw clenched tight. Despicable. Our conversation was interrupted by the shrill ringing of my phone. Derek's name flashed across the screen, and I felt a surge of revulsion. Without hesitation, I declined the call and muted the ringer. Elise's eyes narrowed. What did that weasel want? Probably checking up on me, making sure his little cash cow is still producing. I spat the words like venom, years of pent-up resentment bubbling to the surface. Sliding a worn voice recorder across the table, Elise fixed me with a determined stare. Start wearing this at all times. We need to catch him in the act, get him on record spewing his vitriol. The weight of the device in my palm felt heavy, a tangible reminder of the war I was waging. But I was done being a victim. It was time to fight back. That night, as Derek and I sat down for dinner, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harper picked at her food, her gaze flickering between us like a spectator at a boxing match. What's gotten into you lately? Derek sneered, breaking the uncomfortable silence. You've been acting awfully strange. I took a deep breath, pressing the record button beneath the table. Just focused on the business, that's all. He scoffed, stabbing at his steak with more force than necessary. That little hobby of yours? Don't kid yourself, Ray. It's never going to amount to anything more than a drain on our finances. Harper's eyes widened, but she remained silent, no doubt fearing the wrath of her father's sharp tongue. You know, Derek, I replied, keeping my voice measured and even, for someone who claims to support my dreams, you sure have a funny way of showing it. His fork clattered against the plate as his fist slammed down on the table. Support your dreams? Don't make me laugh. Every penny I've wasted on that ridiculous project is a penny too many. The words stung, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I met his venomous glare with a steely gaze of my own. Well then, it's a good thing you won't have to waste any more of your precious money on me. Rising from the table, I fixed him with a cold smile. I'll be sure to pack my bags tonight. As I left the room, Derek's sputtering protests fell on deaf ears. The war had begun, and I had no intention of losing. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. Derek prowled the halls like a caged animal, his footsteps heavy with barely contained rage. Whenever our paths crossed, his eyes bored into me, searching for any sign of weakness, any crack in my resolute facade. But I refused to break. With each snide remark, each thinly veiled insult, I stood my ground, meeting his vitriol with stony silence. The recorder in my pocket became a talisman of sorts, a constant reminder of the evidence I was against him. Harper, caught in the crossfire, retreated into herself. Gone was the carefree teenager who once laughed and joked with her father. In her place was a hollow-eyed shadow, flinching at raised voices and avoiding us both whenever possible. It was during one of these encounters that the dam finally burst. "What's wrong, Princess?" Derek sneered as Harper scurried past, her gaze fixated on the floor. "Cat got your tongue?" She froze, her shoulders tensing, and for a moment I thought she might flee. But then, slowly, she turned to face him, and the look in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. "Just leave me alone," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek threw back his head and laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that set my teeth on edge. "What's the matter? Daddy's little girl too good to talk to her old man now?" "Derek, that's enough." I stepped forward, placing a hand on Harper's trembling shoulder. She said, "Leave her alone." His gaze snapped to mine, eyes glittering with malice. "Stay out of this, Raylan. This is between me and my daughter." Your daughter? I echoed, my grip tightening on Harper's shoulder. Since when do you give a damn about being a father? All you care about is yourself and your precious money. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. For a heartbeat, Derek was speechless, his face contorting with rage. Then, like a coiled serpent, he struck. How dare you? He snarled, taking a step forward. After everything I've done for this family, for your pathetic little hobby, and this is the thanks I get? Harper flinched, shrinking back against me, but I stood my ground. Reaching into my pocket, I thumbed the record button, capturing every venomous word. You've done nothing but belittle me, Derek, lie to me, steal from me. You're a despicable excuse for a husband and a father. His face turned an ugly shade of purple, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me. But then, as quickly as it had come, the storm passed, and he deflated like a punctured balloon. You'll regret this, he hissed, jabbing a finger in my face. Mark my words, Raylan, I'll make sure you lose everything. With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving Harper and me alone in the oppressive silence. Mom? Her voice was small, tremulous. What's going on? Wrapping an arm around her shoulders, I pulled her close, grateful for the solid weight of her against my side. It's going to be okay, sweetie, I murmured, more for my own benefit than hers. Everything's going to be just fine. But as I gazed down the hall where Derek had disappeared, a tendril of doubt wormed its way into my heart. Had I underestimated his capacity for cruelty? His willingness to drag us all down in his quest for vengeance? Only time would tell. And in the meantime, I would keep fighting. Keep gathering ammunition for the battle to come. Because one thing was certain. I would never let that man break me again. The day had finally come. With Elise's guidance, I'd compiled an ironclad case against Derek, complete with financial records, audio recordings, and a mountain of damning evidence. There would be no more running, no more hiding. It was time to rip off the mask and expose him for the monster he truly was. Are you sure about this? Elise's voice was gentle but laced with steel as we went over the plan one final time. Once you confront him, there's no going back. I took a deep, steadying breath, my fingers tightening around the thick manila envelope containing the fruits of our labor. I'm sure. He needs to answer for what he's done. A soft knock at the door shattered the tense silence. Mom? Elise? It's me, Harper. My heart clenched at the weariness in her voice, a painful reminder of the toll this war had taken on her young spirit. Elise shot me a questioning look, and I nodded, bracing myself for the inevitable explosion. Come in, sweetie. The door creaked open, and Harper slipped inside, her eyes wide and haunted. Dad's home, she whispered, wringing her hands. He's in the living room, waiting for you. My mouth went dry, but I refused to let my nerves show. Squaring my shoulders, I turned to Elise. It's time. She squeezed my arm, offering a grim smile. I've got your back, let's do this. With Harper trailing behind, we made our way to the living room, each footstep echoing like a death knell. Derek looked up as we entered, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Elise. What's going on here? He demanded, rising to his feet. What's she doing in my house? I opened my mouth to respond, but Elise beat me to it. Sit down, Derek, she said, her voice ringing with authority. We need to have a little chat. He bristled, his jaw clenching. I don't take orders from... Sit down. Elise's tone brooked no argument, and after a tense moment, Derek lowered himself back onto the couch, his eyes smoldering with barely concealed rage. Sliding the envelope onto the coffee table, I fixed him with an icy glare. These are detailed financial records, documenting every single penny you've embezzled from my business over the past 5 years. His eyes widened, but he quickly regained his composure, scoffing dismissively. You're delusional. I've done nothing but support your little hobby. Save it. I jabbed a finger at the envelope. The evidence is right there, plain as day, bank statements, wire transfers, everything. Derek opened his mouth, no doubt to spew forth another round of lies and denials, but I cut him off. That's not all. Pulling out my phone, I queued up the first in a long line of audio recordings. I have hours of footage documenting your emotional abuse, your constant belittling and degradation. As his own voice filled the room, hurling insults and venom with chilling casualness, Derek's face drained of color. Harper gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she listened to her father's hateful words. No. Derek's voice was little more than a hoarse croak. You can't. That's not. It's over, Derek. Elise's voice was cold, utterly devoid of mercy. We have more than enough evidence to bury you in court. You're going to jail, and Raylan is taking everything, the house, the business, full custody of Harper. You've lost. For a long moment, silence reigned, broken only by the sound of Derek's ragged breathing. Then, slowly, he turned to face me, and the look in his eyes sent ice flooding through my veins. You'll regret this, he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. I swear to God, Raylan, I'll make you suffer for this. You and that little brat will wish you'd never been born. Before I could respond, Harper was there, stepping between us with her shoulders thrown back and her chin raised in defiant challenge. That's enough out of you, she spat, her voice trembling but unwavering. You're the one who's going to suffer, you pathetic excuse for a father, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. Pride swelled in my chest as I watched my daughter stand tall against the man who'd tormented us for so long. In that moment, I knew we would be okay. We would survive this nightmare, and maybe, just maybe, we'd emerge stronger than ever before. Derek opened his mouth, but whatever vile retort he'd intended died on his lips. With a snarl of impotent rage, he turned and stormed from the room, leaving us standing in silence amidst the wreckage of his shattered lies. It was over. The war had been won. The silence that followed Derek's departure was deafening. Harper and I stood frozen, still processing the explosive confrontation that had just unfolded. Elise was the first to break the stillness, letting out a long, shuddering breath. Well, that could have gone better, she muttered, running a hand through her disheveled hair. Harper whirled on her, eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and anger. You think? That was my dad you just destroyed back there. Harper, I began, reaching out to her, but she jerked away, hugging herself tightly. Don't. Just don't. Her voice cracked, and I watched in dismay as tears spilled down her cheeks. How could you do this, Mom? How could you keep this from me? The accusation in her tone was like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Sweetie, I was just trying to protect you. Protect me? She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. From what? The truth? The fact that my own father is a lying, cheating scumbag? Each word lanced through me, raw and agonizing. Elise stepped forward, her expression softening. Harper, your mom did what she had to do to keep you both safe. Derek is a dangerous man, and I don't want to hear it. Harper exploded, whirling on Elise with clenched fists. You have no idea what you've done, what this is going to do to our family. The anguish in her voice cut me to the core. I wanted nothing more than to take her in my arms, to shield her from the pain and betrayal that had torn our lives asunder. But I knew, deep down, that this was a wound that could not be salved with empty platitudes or motherly affection. This was a hurt that ran bone deep, a festering wound that had been ripped open and left to bleed. Harper, please. I tried again, fighting to keep my voice steady. I never wanted to lie to you, but Derek, he was out of control. He was stealing from me, sabotaging my business, and I was afraid if I told you the truth, he might. Might what? She spat, rounding on me with fresh venom. Hurt us? Abandon us? Well, congratulations, Mom, because now he's going to do both of those things, and so much worse. Her words hit their mark, and I flinched as if struck. Because deep down I knew she was right. In my quest for justice, for vengeance against the man who had betrayed and belittled me, I had set in motion a chain of events that would undoubtedly tear our family apart. Derek's fury knew no bounds, and now that he had been backed into a corner, exposed as the monster he truly was, there was no telling how far he might go to make us pay. A small, traitorous voice whispered that perhaps it would have been better to simply cut my losses, to walk away and start anew. But I knew, in my heart of hearts, that such a path would have led only to more pain, more suffering at his hands. No, I had done the right thing, the only thing I could do to protect Harper and myself from his toxic influence. But that knowledge did little to dull the ache of my daughter's resentment, the guilt that gnawed at my soul for the turmoil I had thrust upon her. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. I'm so sorry. For a long moment Harper simply stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and fled the room. Leaving me standing amidst the wreckage of our fractured family, Elise's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. Give her time, she'll come around. But as I listened to the distant echo of Harper's footsteps, rapidly retreating, I couldn't help but wonder if the damage I had wrought was too deep, too catastrophic to ever be undone. The divorce proceedings were brutal, a no-holds-barred battle fueled by years of pent-up resentment and betrayal. Derek, his back against the wall, fought like a cornered animal, lashing out with every underhanded tactic in the book. "She's an unfit mother," he snarled during one particularly heated hearing, his eyes boring into me with undisguised hatred. Manipulative, vindictive. Is that really the kind of influence you want around an impressionable young girl? I bit back the urge to retaliate, forcing myself to remain composed as Elise rose to my defense. "Your Honor, these baseless accusations are nothing more than a desperate attempt to distract from the real issue at hand, Mr. Collins' repeated embezzlement and financial malfeasance." Derek's face purpled, but before he could unleash another volley of vitriol, the judge intervened. "That's enough, Mr. Collins. I've seen the evidence, and it paints a very clear picture of your actions. Unless you have something of substance to add, I suggest you remain silent." Seething, Derek slumped back in his chair, glowering at me from beneath hooded brows. The message in his eyes was clear. This was far from over. With each passing day, the divisions within our shattered family grew deeper and more pronounced. Harper, caught in the crossfire, retreated further into herself, alternating between bouts of stony silence and explosive outbursts directed at both Derek and me. "I hate you both," she raged one night, hurling a glass against the wall with enough force to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. "You've ruined everything." I flinched as shards exploded around me, piercing my skin with 1,000 tiny lacerations. But the physical pain paled in comparison to the agony of watching my little girl unravel before my eyes. Derek, of course, seized the opportunity to drive the wedge deeper, pulling Harper aside and no doubt filling her head with his twisted version of events. "Don't listen to a word that lying bitch says," I overheard him hiss, his voice dripping with venom. "She's poison, Harper, and she'll only drag you down with her." Part of me wanted to intervene, to shield my daughter from his toxic influence, but a larger, wiser part knew that such actions would only breed more resentment, more ammunition for Derek's manipulative games. So I kept my distance, focusing my energy on the legal battle that would decide the course of our future. With Elise's guidance, I pored over financial statements and witness testimonies, building an impenetrable case against the man who had once sworn to love and cherish me. The realization that our marriage had devolved into this bitter adversarial farce left a hollow ache in my chest. But I knew there was no going back, no chance of salvaging what had been lost. Derek had made his choices, and now he would have to face the consequences. As the divorce proceedings ground on, the media caught wind of our sordid drama, unleashing a torrent of salacious headlines and intrusive reporters. Derek, ever the opportunist, seized his chance to manipulate the narrative, granting exclusive interviews where he painted himself as the long-suffering victim of a deranged, money-hungry shrew. "She's out for blood, plain and simple," he lamented to one particularly eager journalist, his eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "All I ever wanted was to give my family a good life, but it was never enough for Raylan. She let her greed, her delusions of grandeur consume her." I watched in disgust as his lies played out across newspapers and television screens, each fabrication more outrageous than the last. But I refused to take the bait, to engage in the same mudslinging tactics that Derek had embraced so wholeheartedly. No, I would let the evidence speak for itself. The truth was on my side, and try as he might, Derek could never bury that beneath a mountain of deceit and slander. As the media frenzy reached a fever pitch, I found myself longing for the quiet solace of my work, the simple act of creation that had once brought me such joy and fulfillment. But even that refuge had been tainted, the very business I had poured my heart and soul into, now serving as a battleground between Derek and me. In my darkest moments, I wondered if it had all been worth it, the pain, the betrayal, the shattering of everything I had once held dear. But then I would look at Harper, my beautiful, struggling girl caught in the crossfire of her parents' war, and I would know that I had done the only thing I could. For her sake, and for my own self-respect, I had to keep fighting. No matter how high the cost, I would not let Derek emerge victorious from the ashes of our family. Not this time. The day of the final court hearing dawned cold and gray, the somber weather mirroring the weight that had settled over my shoulders. As Elise and I made our way through the courthouse doors, a phalanx of reporters descended upon us, cameras flashing and microphones thrust into our faces. "Miss Collins, is it true you're seeking full custody of your daughter? How do you respond to the allegations that you've been embezzling funds from your own company? Care to comment on the rumors of your husband's alleged affair?" I brushed past them without a word, my jaw clenched in grim determination. Derek, of course, was reveling in the spectacle, pausing every few steps to preen for the cameras and offer up sound bites tailored to paint him as the long-suffering victim. "All I've ever wanted is to protect my little girl," he simpered, his expression one of studied anguish. "But Raylan, she's become unhinged, obsessed with money and revenge. It's tragic, really." I felt Elise tense beside me, and I placed a warning hand on her arm. "Don't take the bait," I murmured. "He's not worth it." Her nostrils flared, but she gave a curt nod, and we continued on our way, leaving Derek to bask in the spotlight he so desperately craved. The courtroom was packed to the rafters, a veritable circus of lawyers, journalists, and gawking spectators. I scanned the crowd, my heart lurching as I spotted Harper sitting towards the back, her shoulders hunched and her gaze determinedly averted from both Derek and me. As the proceedings got underway, it became immediately apparent that the judge had little patience for Derek's grandstanding. He cut through the other man's bloated testimony with razor-sharp precision, dismantling his arguments one by one with cold, irrefutable logic. "You claim your wife was obsessed with money and revenge, Mr. Collins," the judge stated, his voice ringing with thinly veiled disdain. "And yet, the financial records clearly show that you embezzled over $500,000 from her company's accounts over the course of 5 years. How do you explain that?" Derek squirmed in his seat, his bravado faltering under the weight of the damning evidence. "It was a misunderstanding, Your Honor. I was simply lying and stealing from your wife, with whom you had entered into a legal contract as a business partner," the judge interrupted, his eyes flashing. "That's what the evidence shows, Mr. Collins. Shall I go on?" As the judge methodically disassembled Derek's house of lies, I could practically feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. Beside me, Elise radiated quiet triumph, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. When the judge finally rendered his verdict, it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind from Derek's sails and leaving him reeling. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, I am awarding Miss Collins full ownership of her company, as well as sole custody of her daughter, Harper. Mr. Collins, you are hereby ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $600,000, as well as alimony and child support to be determined at a later date." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom, broken only by the muted sobs of a devastated Derek. Elise reached over and squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she murmured. "It's over." But as I turned to face my daughter, my heart plummeted. Harper was staring at me, her expression unreadable, a chasm of hurt and betrayal stretching between us. In that moment, I knew that while the legal battle might be won, the war for my daughter's heart and trust was only just beginning. In the days that followed, Derek's world crumbled around him. His assets were seized, his reputation in tatters. But through it all, he maintained a defiant front, lashing out at anyone and everyone who dared cross his path. It was during one such outburst that Harper, who had been steadfastly avoiding me, finally emerged from the shadows of her self-imposed exile. "You're pathetic," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt as Derek raged and raved in the aftermath of yet another court ruling. "All this time, I thought Mom was the one destroying this family, but you're the real cancer, aren't you?" Derek whirled on her, his face contorted in an ugly snarl. "Watch your mouth, you ungrateful little—" "No, you watch yours." Harper stepped forward, her chin raised in defiant challenge. "I'm done listening to your lies, your manipulations. You're a sad, bitter man, and you've got no one to blame but yourself for the mess you've made of your life." As her words washed over him, I saw something shift in Derek's eyes, a flicker of doubt, of dawning realization that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. For a heartbeat, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then the moment passed, and the sneer was back, twisted and grotesque. "You'll regret this," he hissed, jabbing a finger in Harper's face. "You and your bitch of a mother will regret the day you ever crossed me." Harper didn't so much as flinch. "Save it for someone who still cares, Dad. You're nothing but a pathetic bully, and I'm done being afraid of you." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Derek gaping in her wake like a landed fish. Our eyes met for the briefest of moments, and in that fleeting glance I saw a glimmer of the old Harper, strong, defiant, unbroken. In that moment, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together, united, emboldened by the truth that had finally set us free. Derek might have lost everything, but I had regained something far more precious: my daughter's respect, her trust. And that was a victory worth fighting for. The weeks following the divorce were a whirlwind of activity. With Derek's vindictive presence finally excised from our lives, Harper and I were free to pick up the pieces and begin rebuilding. Gone were the tense silences, the hostile glares and cutting remarks. In their place was a newfound openness, a willingness to communicate and heal the wounds that had been left to fester for far too long. "I'm sorry, Mom," Harper murmured one night as we sat on the patio, nursing mugs of hot chocolate beneath the star-studded sky, "for the way I acted, for shutting you out when you needed me most." I reached over and squeezed her hand, my heart swelling with a potent mix of love and relief. "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetie. What's important is that we're here now, together. That's all that matters." She offered a tentative smile, and in that moment, I saw a glimpse of the carefree girl she had once been, untainted by the bitter rancor of her parents' war. The sight filled me with a renewed sense of determination. I would do whatever it took to shield her from further pain, to ensure that the damage wrought by Derek's actions did not define the rest of her life. With that goal in mind, I threw myself into resurrecting my fashion line, channeling all the fire and passion that had once fueled my every design. Harper, to my immense pride, joined me wholeheartedly, her artistic flair and keen eye breathing fresh life into my creations. "You know, this whole sustainability thing is actually kind of cool," she remarked one afternoon as we pored over a pile of discarded fabric swatches. "Who knew old rags could look so chic?" I laughed, reveling in the sound of her teasing lilt. "I tried to tell you, didn't I? But you were too busy mocking your poor, delusional mother." She pulled a face, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Yeah, well, I was young and stupid. Not to mention brainwashed by a certain lying snake of a father." The barb stung, but I knew there was no venom behind it, only the stark truth that we were both still coming to terms with. Reaching out, I cupped her cheek, marveling at the way she leaned into my touch rather than recoiling. "The important thing is, we're here now, together, and nothing is ever going to tear us apart again." The words felt like a vow, a solemn promise to the both of us. Harper's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them away, offering me a watery smile. "You're right. It's you and me against the world, Mom. Always and forever." As our new line began to take shape, the media caught wind of our triumphant reemergence, fueling a flurry of interest and speculation. Interview requests poured in, each more eager than the last to get the inside scoop on our phoenix-like rise from the ashes of scandal and betrayal. I dismissed them all with a polite but firm refusal. This story, our story, was not fodder for the gossip rags or salacious tell-alls. It was ours, a hard-won victory forged in the fires of pain and heartbreak. The only validation I needed was the look of pride in Harper's eyes as we put the finishing touches on our debut collection. Gone were the dark circles and haunted gaze. In their place was a radiant, effervescent joy that warmed me to my very core. "We did it, Mom," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate stitching of one particularly striking ensemble. "Against all odds, we actually pulled this off." Wrapping an arm around her shoulders, I pulled her close, savoring the moment. "Of course we did, baby girl. When have you ever known your mother to back down from a fight?" She laughed, the sound ringing like music through the bustling studio. Fair point. Though to be honest, I think it was my stubborn determination that really saved the day. "Is that so?" I arched an eyebrow, unable to resist the playful banter. "Well, in that case, maybe I should start calling you Mom instead." Harper made a face, sticking out her tongue. "On second thought, let's not go that far. One diva in the family is more than enough. We dissolved into a fit of giggles, the easy camaraderie a soothing balm on the wounds of the past. In that moment, it was as if the years of turmoil and heartache had never happened. We were just a mother and daughter, united in our love for each other and the craft that had helped heal us both. The night of our launch party, I could scarcely believe how far we'd come. Harper was radiant in one of our signature creations, her megawatt smile lighting up the room as she worked the crowd with effortless poise. Watching her charm and dazzle the assembled fashionistas and industry bigwigs, I felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly stole my breath away. This was her moment, our moment, and no one, not Derek, not the naysayers who had doubted us at every turn, could ever take that away. As the night drew to a close and the last of the well-wishers trickled out, Harper made her way over to me, her eyes sparkling with unbridled joy. "Well," she murmured, looping her arm through mine, "what did you think? Was it everything you dreamed it would be?" Pulling her close, I pressed a kiss to her temple, my heart so full I thought it might burst. "It was more than I ever could have imagined," I whispered fiercely, "and it's only the beginning, baby girl, for both of us." As we stood there, silhouetted against the twinkling lights of our newfound success, I knew that no matter what challenges the future held, we would face them head-on, side by side, unbroken, unstoppable, invincible. A mother and daughter, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the indomitable strength of our bond. Our story was far from over. It had only just begun. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. I froze in the hallway, hands trembling, as the conversation in the living room pierced my ears. "We need a new wife for Mitchell who can give us a grandson to carry on the family name," Franklin's gruff voice resonated. "That Adrienne is a failure. 15 years and she couldn't produce a male heir." My heart pounded, breath growing shallow. This couldn't be happening. "I agree," Louise chimed in, her tone laced with disdain. "It's time we found Mitchell a younger, more fertile replacement." Mitchell remained silent, his lack of objection a deafening betrayal. I clutched the wall for support, fighting the urge to burst through the door. How could the man I loved, the man whose family I had sacrificed everything for, be so complicit in this vile scheme? "Perhaps a woman from a respectable family this time," Franklin continued, driving the knife deeper. "Not some inexperienced nobody like Adrienne." Tears stung my eyes as their venomous insults lacerated my soul. All the belittling, the years of walking on eggshells in my own home, it had led to this. My disposal like a worn piece of furniture. The room fell silent. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't discover me eavesdropping. Footsteps approached, and I scrambled back towards the stairs, my heart in my throat. As I reached the top step, Ella appeared at the end of the hallway. "Mom, is everything okay?" I startled, her voice shattering my frantic haze. My beautiful, innocent daughter, would she become another casualty of this family's ruthless ambition? "Everything's fine, sweetie," I lied, forcing a smile as I pulled her into an embrace. "Just got a little dizzy, that's all." As I stroked her hair, my mind whirled. This couldn't go on any longer. Enough was enough. Those vicious snakes downstairs had awoken a protective fury within me, one that would stop at nothing to shelter my daughter from their toxicity. We had sacrificed too much already. My once blossoming career, laid to waste years ago when Mitchell insisted I be a stay-at-home wife to appease his controlling parents. All the demeaning comments, the constant dismissal of my role in this household, I had endured it for Ella's sake, hoping to preserve some semblance of family. But now they sought to tear us apart, to discard me and destroy the life I had desperately clung to. Not anymore. Those delusional fools had ignited an unquenchable fire within me. I would burn their twisted legacy to the ground. Sleep evaded me that night, as the venomous words replayed in my mind like a broken record. I tossed and turned, haunted by the prospect of being torn from my own family by those deceitful vipers downstairs. Mitchell remained oblivious, snoring beside me as if his parents hadn't just signed my death warrant. How could he be so blind, so resigned to their manipulative ways? The memories came flooding back, the demoralizing comments about my inability to birth a son, the snide remarks diminishing my role as a wife and mother. All along, it had been building towards this sick ultimatum. As dawn broke, I rose quietly, my restless mind swirling with anger and determination. Peering into Ella's room, I watched her sleep peacefully, her face a vision of tranquil innocence. She deserved so much better than this twisted farce of a family. Descending the stairs, I braced myself for the onslaught that would come. Franklin and Louise were already seated at the breakfast table, their expressions stern as gunshots. Well, if it isn't our useless daughter-in-law," Franklin sneered as I entered. "Did you finally come to your senses about providing us with a real heir?" My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. "How dare you treat me with such disrespect in my own home?" Louise scoffed. "This is our home, you ungrateful fool, and you'll soon learn your place when Mitchell finds himself a new wife." The audacity of her words ignited my fury. "Over my dead body, I've sacrificed everything for this family, subjecting myself to your demeaning insults and archaic expectations." "Expectations you failed to meet," Franklin countered, his eyes narrowing to callous slits. 15 years without a grandson. You're the failure here, not us." I recoiled as if struck, their cruelty seeming to manifest as physical blows against my psyche. Mitchell entered, his brow furrowed. "What's with all the yelling?" "Your precious wife has finally found her voice," Louise spat. "Pity she didn't put that fire into producing an heir." Mitchell's gaze fell, his jaw tensing but no words escaping his lips. My heart sank. He wouldn't defend me, not against his poisonous parents. In that moment, any remnant of love I felt withered on the vine. This marriage, this family, it was all a lie perpetuated by heartless tyrants obsessed with legacy over humanity. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. If they thought they could bully me into quiet submission, they were gravely mistaken. Steeling my nerves, I met Franklin's menacing glare with unwavering defiance. "You want a new woman for your spawn? You'll have to kill me first, because I'll burn this whole damn facade to the ground before letting you inflict your soulless dominance over me or my daughter." Their stunned silence spoke volumes. They had awoken a vengeful spirit they couldn't tame. Let the games begin. In the aftermath of my defiant outburst, a tense silence blanketed the house. Franklin and Louise avoided me like the plague, scowling whenever our paths crossed. Mitchell remained his typical apathetic self, seemingly oblivious to the war brewing under his own roof. My sole solace came from Ella, whose bright spirit served as a beacon during those turbulent days. But even she couldn't the darkness creeping into her eyes, the byproduct of this family's endless toxicity. "Mom, why do Grandpa and Grandma always treat you like that?" she asked one afternoon as we prepared dinner. I froze, uncertain how to respond without shattering her innocence. "They're just set in their ways, honey. Old-fashioned thinking." Her brow furrowed. "But the way they talk to you, it's not right." Sliding the casserole into the oven, I pulled her into a tight embrace, my heart aching at her precocious awareness. She deserved so much better than this poisonous environment. A knock at the door interrupted our moment. I answered to find Leo, one of the graphic designers from my former workplace, standing on the doorstep. "Leo, what are you doing here?" "I tried calling, but you didn't answer," he said, wringing his hands nervously. "I have some things I need to tell you, in private." Something in his tone hinted at its importance. "Of course, come in." As we settled in the living room, Leo's usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a somber frown. "Adrian, I don't know how to say this." My heart raced, fearing the worst. "What is it?" He exhaled deeply. "It's about Mitchell's family business. There are rumors circulating about illegal practices, tax evasion, shady dealings, you name it. I wanted to give you a heads up." The air left my lungs in a forceful gust. Of course, why was I even surprised at this point? Franklin's obsession with legacy must have clouded any semblance of ethics or morality. "Are you sure about this?" I pressed. An idea sparked in my mind, a possible path to freedom from this wretched family's clutches. Leo nodded solemnly. "I've heard it from multiple sources. Just be careful, Adrian. These aren't the type of people you want to cross." As if on cue, Franklin's booming voice echoed through the hall. "Who are you talking to, you insolent?" He stopped short at the sight of Leo, his expression contorting into a mask of fury and trepidation. In that fleeting moment, I glimpsed the panic in the old bastard's eyes. He knew, and he knew that I knew. No longer would we cower under the weight of their contemptible actions. Armed with this newfound knowledge, the shackles began to loosen. "Everything okay, Adrian?" Leo's concerned voice shattered the tension. I met Franklin's widening glare with a subtle smirk. Everything's just fine. In fact, it's better than it's been in a long time. The game was afoot, the first counterattack in my quest to dismantle their toxic empire. Justice would be served, by any means necessary. Franklin and Louise descended upon me like a pack of rabid wolves the following day. Their faces were twisted into snarling masks of rage, eyes burning with unbridled fury. "Who was that man in our home yesterday?" Franklin spat, slamming his fist on the kitchen counter. "Bringing strange men around without our permission?" Louise crowded me against the refrigerator, her thin lips curled into a sneer. "Trying to find a replacement for our pathetic son already? You conniving little—" "That's enough." I silenced her tirade, squaring my shoulders in defiance. "That strange man is a former colleague. Unlike you two, he actually treats me with basic human decency." Franklin's eyes narrowed to predatory slits. "Watch your tone, girl. This is still our house." "For now," I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for his ears to prick up. Before he could respond, Mitchell's oblivious voice rang out from the living room. "Mom, Dad, are we still going to Aunt Kathy's party tonight?" As if a switch had flipped, Franklin and Louise's faces melted into grandfatherly masks of benevolence. "Of course, son," Franklin called out jovially. "We'll be right there." With one final scathing glare in my direction, they disappeared down the hallway, their sickening charade already in full swing. I doubled over, hands bracing against the counter as I struggled to catch my breath. This incessant gaslighting and emotional whiplash left me constantly on edge, my defenses forever raised. The party that evening was a waking nightmare. Kathy's lavish home was filled with Franklin and Louise's elitist cohorts, their fake smiles and vapid conversations sapping my will to exist. Mitchell reveled in the attention, basking in his family's twisted vision of success. As the evening descended into drunken revelry, Franklin seized the moment to lay into me once more. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" he bellowed, silencing the gathered guests. "Here it comes, the public debasement he seemed to relish dishing out. I'd like to make a toast," he continued, swirling his glass of scotch, "to my wonderful family, the backbone that has allowed our business to thrive all these years." Obediently, Mitchell and Kathy's family raised their glasses in celebration. My stomach turned at the sycophantic display. "And a special toast." Franklin leveled his reptilian glare at me, a sinister grin creeping across his face. "To my dear daughter-in-law, Adrienne, who has graced us with her boundless love and support for over 15 blessed years." The jeers and chuckles erupted immediately, raucous laughter echoing through the opulent hall. I fought back hot tears, my cheeks burning crimson with humiliation as all eyes bored into me. "What's the matter, dear?" Louise sneered, her voice dripping with malice. "No son to help carry on the family legacy?" That was it, the final indignity I could withstand. A familiar fire erupted in my soul, scorching away any remaining chains that once bound me to this abusive fiasco. I locked eyes with Franklin, my gaze hardening into steel-forged resolution. "You'll get your heir, Franklin. One way or another." His smug smirk faltered ever so slightly at my ominous words. The game was evolving now, the gloves coming off in this nightmarish battle of wills. There would be no more hollow compromises or feeble acquiescence. The avenging flame had been lit. In the wake of that disastrous party, a calm determination settled over me. No more would I cower under Franklin and Louise's twisted reign of terror. The path forward was clear. I would free myself and Ella from their poisonous clutches, no matter the cost. The first step required fortifying my defenses. I reached out to Leo, confiding in him the full extent of the abuse and degradation I had endured over the years. To his credit, he didn't flinch or judge, he simply listened with a compassionate ear. "You can't keep living like this, Adrienne," he said, after I had unloaded the full weight of my tortured story. "This kind of toxicity, it's soul-crushing." I nodded warily. "I know, but it's not just about me anymore. I need to get Ella away from their influence before it's too late." Leo leaned forward, his expression one of grim determination. "Then you have to get out. Both of you, clean break and start over somewhere new." The thought simultaneously exhilarated and terrified me. Could I really just uproot my entire life and flee from Mitchell's family? From the man I had once loved? But one glance at the photo of Ella on my dresser steeled my resolve. She was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing everything to liberate us both. "You're right," I said, meeting Leo's gaze with newfound conviction. "I've let them control me for far too long. It's time I took my life back." A subtle smile played across Leo's lips. "I might know someone who can help with that, if you're serious." My heart raced, though not with fear, with the thrilling embrace of taking that first defiant step. "I'm dead serious." Over the next few weeks, the plan took shape. Leo connected me with a contact who could provide new identities and credentials for me and Ella. A fresh start, far away from Franklin's poisonous empire. I also began diligently documenting every instance of their abhorrent behavior, recording conversations with a hidden device to preserve evidence of their threats and mistreatment. The pieces were falling into place. Of course, severing ties required money. My own savings having long been drained, financing their lavish lifestyle. So I did what any reasonable person would. I began systematically pillaging their household accounts, siphoning off enough to secure a new home and transition into this new life. It was a heady rush, chipping away at the foundation of their control with every covert transfer. With each withdrawal, I could taste the sweet liberation inching ever closer. The final puzzle piece fell into place when Leo approached me one afternoon, a modest grin adorning his face. "You'll never guess what just happened," he began, unable to contain his excitement. "One of the ad agencies I applied to, they want me, a senior design role in Denver." My eyes widened at the implication. Denver, over 1,000 miles away, far enough to escape this waking nightmare permanently. "Leo, that's incredible," I gushed, pulling him into an appreciative embrace. As we separated, his expression turned serious once more. "You know, they'd be insane not to want to bring you aboard, too. With your portfolio and experience?" I felt my heart swell with hope. "Are you saying?" A sly grin answered my unfinished query. "Let's just say your escape plan just got a hell of a lot more real." Giddy excitement bubbled within me. This was it. The rebirth I had dreamed of for years, but never imagined possible. The shackles of Franklin's tyranny were rusting away with each passing day. I was ready to breathe free again. The weeks flew by in a frenzied blur as Leo and I put the final pieces of our meticulously crafted escape into place. With each passing day, my heart raced with the tantalizing promise of imminent freedom from Franklin's toxic stranglehold. And yet, a part of me couldn't shake the nagging sense of obligation, the need to administer one final, righteous act of defiance before fleeing into the great unknown. It was during one of my covert recording sessions that the answer revealed itself, Franklin's very words providing the cosmic green light I had been seeking. "Told Henderson we'd have those shipments mislabeled and across the border by Friday," he grumbled to Louise in the study one evening. "That money launderer better hold up his end of the bargain this time." Money laundering and smuggling, the illegal dealings Leo had forewarned me about, now confirmed in high-definition audio quality. My chest tightened with perverse validation. This was it, the damning evidence that could bring their empire crumbling down around their rotten cores. Although delivering this recording to the authorities risked exposing my own culpability, the temptation to rain righteous fury upon their deceitful heads proved too delicious to resist. The day before our scheduled departure, with our falsified documents and new lives prepped for Denver, I decided to enact my parting salvo. As Mitchell and his simpering parents gathered to watch another mind-numbing sitcom rerun, I slipped the recording onto an unmarked disc and mailed it with an anonymous tip. My heart hammered as I sealed the envelope, half expecting Franklin to somehow sniff out my act of rebellion and retaliate. But the night passed like any other, filled with their meaningless droning and self-congratulatory posturing. Ella and I made our move the following morning, both of us dragging lightly packed luggage towards the awaiting taxi. Franklin and Louise were conveniently detained at some charity brunch, while Mitchell had already departed for the office. I steeled myself as I turned towards the home that had been my gilded prison for over a decade and a half, fighting back the urge to spit venom in its direction. Instead, I allowed the faintest hint of a smile to grace my lips as one fleeting thought carried me forward. "Enjoy the reckoning, you bastards." The voyage to Denver passed in a dreamlike trance of giddy liberation. Gone were the weighted stares and snide remarks, replaced by the purifying vistas of a new frontier blurring past the taxi's windows. It was here, in a picturesque downtown loft that Leo had arranged for us, that the first reports began trickling in. Speculative mumblings online of Mitchell's family business being raided by federal agents. Allegations of fraud and financial improprieties. Each refresh of my burner phone's browser revealed further details of the proverbial House of Cards collapse. Overseas accounts seized, assets frozen, the entire rotten family in for questioning amidst a sordid firestorm of scandal. I absorbed it all with a heady mix of savage satisfaction and deeply rooted melancholy. As much as I had longed for this karmic reckoning, a small part of my heart ached for the good man Mitchell once was before becoming completely ensconced in his family's depravity. But that man was long dead now, replaced by a shell of obedient compliance. I had done what was necessary to save myself, and more importantly, to preserve Ella's innocence from their corruptive grasp. As the first traces of a Rocky Mountain sunset bled through our loft's picture windows, I felt Ella's small hand slipping into my own. Her warm smile was the reassuring balm I needed in that moment. "It's going to be okay now, isn't it, Mom?" I pulled her close, planting a tender kiss on her forehead as I committed to the words that would steer us forward into this new beginning. "Yes, my sweet girl. From now on, everything is going to be okay." The images flooded the news cycle in the days that followed. A disgraceful parade of perp walks and mugshots featuring Franklin, Louise, and their once illustrious family of criminal associates. Seeing those smug, condescending faces twisted into masks of abject humiliation filled me with a nauseating sense of gratification. The mighty patriarchs had fallen, brought low by the very greed and egomania that had fueled their toxic empire. They were finished, their hollow legacy cratering into a scorched pit of legal ruin and insolvency. A chapter of our lives that had once seemed inescapable was now drawing to a brutal, definitive close. My burner phone rang incessantly those first few weeks, Mitchell's number flashing across the screen like a deranged stalker. I never answered, of course. What could he possibly say to excuse his willing complicity in their depravity? To make amends for the years of emotional and psychological torment he enabled? No, the Mitchell I had loved was gone, forever sullied by an obsession with status and his family's perverse value system. He had made his bed, soiling the once pristine sheets with greed and moral bankruptcy. Now he could lie in it. The media fanfare surrounding the case was insatiable. Every tawdry detail, every allegation of financial chicanery splashed across the front pages in grandiose headlines: "Empire of Deceit, Family Business Revealed as Criminal Front." A part of me couldn't help but revel in the shameless rubbernecking. These were the very same high society elites who had once revered Franklin and his brood, suckling from the teat of their ill-gotten riches and high-minded heirs. Now those same sycophantic leeches were lining up for a front-row seat to this grotesque public lynching. Through it all, Ella remained my unshakable pillar of strength and clarity. While the news broadcasts recounted each sordid revelation with rabid indignation, her gentle hand would find mine, calming eyes reminding me of what truly mattered. We were free from their venomous clutches, the scourge of their poisonous influence exorcised by the brilliant light of justice. In time, even my own name would occasionally slip into the news cycle, comment sections speculating about the disillusioned wife who had finally had enough, who brought the whole rickety facade tumbling down. Each mention sparked a defiant fire within me, emboldening my sense of righteousness in the face of those who still sought to cast aspersions. They didn't see me as a victim who escaped, who reclaimed her autonomy by whatever means were available. No, in their privileged eyes I was simply another pariah to condemn, a filthy rat who had abandoned the sinking ship of family values and reputation maintenance. But I didn't need their hollow approval or shallow acceptance any longer. Those days of deference were buried, replaced by an awakened sense of purpose instilled by the mere act of perseverance. When the smoke finally cleared, our fractured little family would emerge from the rubble, hardened but victorious. And emerge we did, first in a modest two-bedroom flat near Leo's design firm, then slowly blossoming into an idyllic new life as the court-appointed restitution checks began to roll in. With each deposit, I could sense Ella's spirit elevating, her once dimmed sparkle reigniting in the warm glow of our freedom. We were more than survivors. We were the rising phoenix, scorched wings spreading wide to embrace a vibrant new reality far removed from that warped paradigm. No longer bound by poisonous pedigree or archaic patriarchal values, our truth finally unfurled for the world to witness. The apple never fell far from the tree after all. Sometimes they simply chose to forge a brand new orchard of their own making. The years melted away in a surreal blur of newfound tranquility and hard-earned growth. As Mitchell's family circus careened further into legal purgatory, Ella and I steadily rebuilt our lives from those traumatic rubble heaps. Denver proved to be the dream reboot we had so desperately craved, a world away from the suffocating toxicity of our former existence. Leo's design agency was a welcoming haven, the creative team treating me like a long-lost comrade rather than an outcast pariah. It was there, developing cutting-edge ad campaigns in a nurturing environment, that I finally rediscovered the spark that had set my soul afire all those years ago. The passion, the drive, the addictive thrill of visual storytelling, it all came roaring back with amplified intensity. While I thrived professionally, Ella's own transformation left me in awestruck admiration. The once shy, withdrawn young girl had blossomed into a confident, brilliant young woman, top of her class and already fielding inquiries from elite universities across the country. Our cozy two-bedroom flat, a humble refuge in those shaky early days, steadily gave way to an airy downtown loft, teeming with contemporary furnishings and Ella's vibrant artwork adorning the exposed brick walls. A canvas of her own reinvention, a physical manifestation of how far we had come. Holidays and special occasions, once tainted by Franklin's looming specter of scorn, became cherished celebrations sans judgment or archaic expectations. Blissfully ordinary rituals like baking pies for Thanksgiving or stringing up twinkling lights for Christmas filled our beings with joy rather than dread. At last we were beholden only to our own values, our own visions of what constituted a life well lived. No more pandering to hollow ideals or self-righteous blowhards obsessed with appearances over human dignity. Of course, the legal maelstrom endured like a nagging pop-up ad you could never quite close. Depositions and court dates, investment account audits, and impassioned victim statements. It seemed there was no end to the punitive wrangling over Mitchell's family's illegally acquired holdings and business entities. Through it all, I steadfastly refused to let the toxicity seep back into our reclaimed serenity. Gone were the days of bending to their antiquated will, of allowing them to extort my happiness and autonomy. Ella was my singularly empowering force now, her dazzling smile and academic accolades the only lingering proof I required of our profound metamorphosis. Then came the day I'll never forget. Ella's high school graduation party in our open-air loft, surrounded by Leo and her beaming new social circle of creatives and young progressives. A joyous kaleidoscope of positive energy in sharp contrast to the grotesque farce of that Aunt Kathy gala years prior. I watched my daughter mingle and exude self-assured warmth with a surreal sense of catharsis and validation. This beaming aura of confidence and freedom, with not a trace of familial anguish to restrain her effervescent spirit, it was more than I could have ever dreamed for her. In that moment, as the celebratory chatter echoed through our vibrant living space, I finally exhaled the last lingering twinges of psychological shrapnel. The looking glass had rematerialized into a shining reflection of succor and empowered rebirth, our journey from subjugation to self-actualization solidifying into an unblemished truth. Those reconstructive years had molded us into modern warriors, philosophers of the human condition emerging from the fires of domestic purgatory, tempered by the flames, yet nor vindicated by the righteous path we had chosen to carve through the shadows of oppression. And as Ella embraced me with glistening eyes and a radiant smile, I knew our next chapter was only just beginning to unfurl its magnificent wings. The vibrant chime of my phone echoed through the bedroom, jarring me from a restless slumber. I glanced at the clock, 3:14 a.m. An uneasy feeling settled in my gut as I reached for the device. Work emergencies at this hour were rare, but not unheard of in my line of business. My fingers froze as I caught a glimpse of the screen. It wasn't a work notification, it was a message from an unknown number. Curiosity piqued, I swiped to unlock the phone, and my world shattered. "Can't wait to see you again, babe. That quickie in the supply closet was insane." The message was undoubtedly not meant for me, but the sender's identity was all too clear. Marissa, my cousin and supposed confidant, who had been staying with Derek and me to help during his recovery. Bile rose in my throat as I scrolled through the thread, each message more explicit than the last. The betrayal cut deeper with every lewd word, every suggestive emoji. Derek's affair with Marissa was laid bare before my eyes, the evidence irrefutable. I turned to face Derek's sleeping form, my vision blurred by unshed tears. How could he? How could they? Marissa was family, someone I had trusted implicitly. Yet there they were, carrying on a sordid affair right under my nose. Anger and hurt swirled within me, a tempestuous storm of emotions threatening to break loose. I longed to scream, to hurl accusations and demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. Instead, I slipped out of bed, my movements robotic, and made my way to the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, clutching Derek's phone like a lifeline, its damning contents a stark reminder of the life I thought I knew crumbling around me. Hours ticked by, the first rays of dawn peeking through the curtains. I heard footsteps behind me, the telltale creak of the floorboards announcing Derek's presence. "Elena, what are you doing up so early?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I pivoted to face him, my jaw clenched, and held up the phone, the incriminating messages splayed across the screen. "Care to explain this?" Derek's expression morphed from confusion to panic in an instant. I can explain," he stammered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Explain what exactly?" I snapped, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "How you've been sleeping with my cousin right under my nose, how you've been betraying me with someone I trusted." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off, unwilling to hear his excuses. "Save it, Derek. I don't want to hear your lies anymore." Anger and anguish welled up within me, threatening to spill over. I fought to maintain my composure, to cling to the last shreds of dignity I had left. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes hardening. "If you hadn't been so wrapped up in your work all the time, maybe this wouldn't have happened." His words sliced through me like a knife, twisting the blade of betrayal deeper into my heart. In that moment, I knew our marriage was well and truly over. I rose from the couch, squaring my shoulders and meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Get out." Derek opened his mouth to protest, but I silenced him with a shake of my head. "Just go, Derek. We're done." As he stormed out of the apartment, the weight of his betrayal finally hit me, and I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body. But amidst the pain and heartbreak, a newfound determination took root within me. They would pay for this. Both of them. In the days following Derek's explosive revelation, a fog of grief and disbelief enveloped me. I alternated between fits of rage and deep sorrow, grappling with the harsh reality of his betrayal. But as the initial shock subsided, a steely resolve took root. I would not be a victim. Not anymore. I confided in Alex, my closest friend and a brilliant lawyer. His jaw tightened as I recounted the sordid details, his normally jovial demeanor replaced by a cold fury. "That lying, deceitful bastard," he seethed, slamming his fist on the table. "We're going to bury him, Elena. I promise you that." With Alex's guidance, I began meticulously gathering evidence of Derek's misdeeds, leaving no stone unturned. Late nights were spent combing through financial records, unearthing a trail of embezzlement and fraud that seemed to stretch back years. Derek had the audacity to confront me one evening as I pored over the damning documents. "What are you up to, Elena?" he demanded, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I met his gaze head-on, refusing to flinch. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing, though I think I already know the answer." He scoffed, his lips curling into a contemptuous sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Newsflash, sweetheart. You're just a pretty face. Without me, your precious company would be nothing." White-hot rage coursed through my veins, but I reined it in, forcing a tight smile. "We'll see about that, won't we?" As the weeks passed, the web of deceit surrounding Derek and Marissa grew increasingly tangled. Marissa had not only been complicit in the affair, but had actively aided Derek in siphoning funds from my company. I summoned her to my office, the weight of the evidence heavy in my hands. She sauntered in, her expression a sickening mix of arrogance and feigned innocence. "Elena, darling, what's this all about?" she simpered, batting her eyelashes. I slapped the stack of papers onto the desk, my teeth clenched. "Cut the act, Marissa. I know everything. The affair, the embezzlement. You two make me sick." Her facade crumbled, replaced by a sneer that twisted her once familiar features into an ugly mask. "Oh, please, like you're some paragon of virtue. You were never around, always too busy with your precious company to pay attention to Derek. He needed someone who could actually satisfy him in more ways than one." The venom in her words stung, but I refused to let her see me flinch. "You're both going to pay for what you've done," I vowed, my voice low and dangerous. Marissa threw back her head and laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? Face it, Elena, you're powerless. Derek and I hold all the cards." I leaned forward, my gaze boring into hers with icy determination. "We'll see about that." As she swept out of the office, I allowed myself a grim smile. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. With Alex's help, I would dismantle their lives piece by piece until they had nothing left but the consequences of their actions. The war had only just begun. In the wake of Marissa's taunting diatribe, a cold clarity washed over me. If I wanted to emerge victorious from this battle, I needed to arm myself to the teeth. Blind rage and impulsive actions would only play into Derek and Marissa's hands. No, I needed to be strategic, calculating, to fight fire with an inferno of my own making. I summoned Alex to my office, my expression grim. "It's time we took the gloves off," I stated, sliding the damning evidence across the desk towards him. His brow furrowed as he skimmed the documents, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Son of a bitch has been bleeding your company dry for years," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "Exactly, which is why we need to hit him where it hurts. His bank account." I leaned forward, my gaze steely. "I want you to freeze every asset, revoke all access to funds, the whole 9 yards. Derek thinks money is power? Let's see how powerful he feels when he's broke and exposed as the fraud he is." A feral grin spread across Alex's face. "Consider it done. I'll have the paperwork filed first thing tomorrow morning." As Alex left to set the wheels in motion, I turned my attention to another crucial front, protecting my own assets. Derek and Marissa may have thought they held all the cards, but I wasn't about to make it easy for them. I summoned my finance team, my expression grave. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we have a situation on our hands." Over the next few hours, I worked tirelessly to transfer funds, liquidate investments, and batten down every financial hatch. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my assets were secured, safely out of Derek and Marissa's grubby paws. The first salvo had been fired. A few days later, Alex strode into my office, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "It's done. Derek's assets have been frozen, and the authorities are investigating his financial dealings." Relief washed over me, but I knew this was just the beginning. Derek would undoubtedly retaliate, and I had to be prepared. Sure enough, my phone rang later that evening, Derek's name flashing across the screen. I answered with a smirk. "Hello, dear husband." His voice was a low snarl, barely contained fury simmering beneath the surface. "What the hell did you do, Elena? My accounts are locked, my cards declined, everything's frozen." "Oh, I'm sorry, did I fail to mention?" I feigned innocence, unable to resist twisting the knife. "I'm taking what's mine, Derek. Every last penny you stole from me, from my company, you and your little mistress are going to pay for what you've done." There was a beat of silence, and then he erupted, a torrent of vile profanities spewing forth. "You conniving bitch! You think you've won, but you're dead wrong. This isn't over, not by a long shot." The line went dead, but his words only fueled my resolve. Let him rant and rave. I was holding all the cards now. With my assets secure and the law on my side, Derek and Marissa were nothing more than trapped rats, their world crumbling around them. I poured myself a glass of wine, allowing a self-satisfied smile to tug at my lips. The battle was far from over, but the tides had well and truly turned in my favor. They had started this war, but I was going to finish it, and emerge victorious, no matter what it took. With Derek's assets frozen and the authorities sniffing around his financial dealings, it was time to unleash the next phase of my counterattack. I knew Derek wouldn't go down without a fight, but I was prepared for all-out war. I strode into Alex's office, my jaw set with grim determination. It's time we brought out the big guns. Alex looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised. You know I live for dramatic flair, but I'm going to need a bit more context here. I want to file for divorce and hit Derek with every legal claim in the book. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, the whole 9 yards. My voice was steely, brooking no argument. A feral grin spread across Alex's face. Now you're speaking my language. I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. True to his word, Alex had the divorce papers ready within days, complete with a laundry list of charges that would make any self-respecting criminal's head spin. I signed them with a flourish, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. Derek's going to fight this tooth and nail, you know that, right? Alex cautioned, his expression serious. I met his gaze levelly. I'm counting on it. The moment the papers were filed, all hell broke loose. Derek's lawyer, a smarmy little weasel of a man, descended upon me like a rabid dog, hurling threats and accusations. This is a gross overreaction, Mrs. Davis, he sneered, his beady eyes narrowed with disdain. My client may have made some indiscretions, but this legal onslaught is completely unwarranted. I arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. Indiscretions? Is that what you call defrauding a company and cheating on your wife with her own cousin? The weasel's face reddened, but I pressed on, relentless. Your client is a lying, thieving scumbag, and he's going to pay for what he's done, in full. As the legal battle raged on, Derek and Marissa's sordid affair became public knowledge, splashed across every tabloid and gossip rag. Suddenly, the perfect couple everyone had envied was a punchline, a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. Derek tried to maintain his usual bravado, sneering at reporters and issuing terse, no comments, but I could see the cracks in his facade, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Marissa, on the other hand, seemed to relish the attention, preening and posing for the cameras like a deranged socialite. That is, until the backlash from her own family hit. Her parents disowned her, her siblings cut off all contact. Even her friends abandoned her, appalled by her despicable actions. As for me, I weathered the storm with my head held high, refusing to be cowed or shamed. Derek and Marissa had made their bed, and now they could lie in it, squirming under the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. The courtroom battles were brutal, with both sides flinging allegations and personal attacks like grenades. But thanks to Alex's legal prowess and the mountain of evidence we'd amassed, we emerged victorious time and again. Finally, after months of bitter legal warfare, the knockout blow was delivered. Derek was not only forced to relinquish control of my company, but found himself facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. As the judge read out the verdict, I allowed myself a satisfied smile. Derek caught my gaze, his eyes burning with impotent rage and hatred. But I didn't care. He was finished. His life in ruins. The war was over, and I had won. With Derek's assets frozen and the legal noose tightening around his neck, I expected him to slink away into the shadows, tail tucked between his legs. But the man was nothing if not a glutton for punishment. I'd barely savored my courtroom victory when my phone rang, Derek's name flashing across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered, bracing myself for the inevitable torrent of vitriol. You think you've won, don't you? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. Well, you're sadly mistaken. This isn't over, not by a long shot. I rolled my eyes, utterly unfazed by his empty bravado. Save your breath, Derek. The courts have ruled, and you've been exposed as the lying, thieving scumbag you are. It's over. There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his devious little mind. Maybe for me, he conceded, his tone taking on a sinister edge. But what about your precious company? You really think you're going to be able to run that ship without me? A knot of dread formed in the pit of my stomach, but I refused to show any outward signs of concern. I've been running this company just fine for years, Derek. You were nothing but a leech, draining its resources for your own gain. He barked out a harsh laugh. Keep telling yourself that, sweetheart. But the truth is you're in way over your head without me. Just you wait. Your precious empire is going to come crashing down around you. The line went dead, but his words continued to echo in my mind, stoking the flames of doubt and uncertainty. Could he be right? Had I underestimated just how much control he'd wielded over the company's inner workings? I pushed the thoughts aside, refocusing my energy on securing my position and safeguarding the company from any further sabotage. With Derek's influence excised like a cancer, I set about purging his loyalists from key positions, replacing them with trusted allies. It wasn't long before the first bombshell hit. An anonymous whistleblower came forward, alleging that Derek had been cooking the books and falsifying financial reports for years. The news sent shockwaves through the company, triggering a mass exodus of investors and clients fleeing the perceived instability. I called an emergency meeting with my executive team, my expression grim. "All right, people, we have a crisis on our hands. Derek's left us a lovely parting gift in the form of cooked books and shady dealings." Panic flickered across their faces, but I silenced it with a raised hand. "But that ends today. From this moment on, we're going to scrub this company clean, leave no stone unturned. We're going to root out every last trace of Derek's corruption and rebuild from the ground up." There were murmurs of assent, but one voice piped up from the back of the room. "With all due respect, ma'am, how can we be sure you're not just as compromised as Derek was?" The accusation hung in the air like a lead balloon, but I met it head-on, unflinching. Because I'm not the one who betrayed this company for personal gain. I'm not the one who cheated and lied and stole. Derek did this, not me. I swept my gaze across the room, my expression resolute. "I know I've got my work cut out for me in terms of regaining your trust, but I'm going to prove to each and every one of you that this company is in good hands, my hands." It was an uphill battle, but slowly, surely, I began to turn the tide. One by one, I won over the doubters, the skeptics, through sheer force of will and an unwavering commitment to transparency and integrity. As for Derek and Marissa, their fall from grace was as swift as it was brutal. With the legal walls closing in and their reputations in tatters, they found themselves social pariahs, shunned and ostracized by their former circles. I caught wind of Marissa's spectacular downfall. She'd been fired from her cushy marketing job, her severance package revoked in light of the scandal. Her family had disowned her, and her so-called friends had abandoned her, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. As for Derek, well, let's just say that his newfound status as a convicted felon didn't exactly open many doors in the business world. The once mighty titan had been reduced to a punchline, a cautionary tale of hubris and greed. And me? I stood at the helm of my company, battered but unbroken, a phoenix rising from the ashes of Derek's betrayal. The road ahead was long and arduous, but I was ready to rebuild, to reclaim what was mine, and to emerge stronger than ever before. Derek and Marissa had tried to break me, but in the end they had only forged me into steel. In the aftermath of Derek's dramatic unraveling, a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me. The lying, cheating scumbag had finally received his comeuppance, his life in ruins, a fitting punishment for the devastation he'd wrought. But even as I savored my hard-won victory, a nagging sense of unease gnawed at me. Derek's final threat still echoed in my mind, a dark promise that my struggles were far from over. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the other shoe dropped. I was in the middle of a meeting with the marketing team, discussing strategies to rebuild our brand's tarnished image, when Alex burst through the door, his expression thunderous. "Elena, we need to talk. Now." His tone brooked no argument. I excused myself, dread coiling in the pit of my stomach, and followed Alex to his office. He wasted no time in dropping the bombshell. "Derek's filed a lawsuit against you and the company," he growled, slamming a thick stack of papers onto his desk. "He's claiming you orchestrated a campaign of defamation and destroyed his career out of spite." White-hot fury surged through my veins as I scanned the documents. "Are you kidding me? After everything that Snake did, the fraud, the embezzlement, the affair, he has the audacity to play the victim?" Alex held up a placating hand. I know, and trust me, this case is weaker than a wet paper bag. But it's still going to be a massive headache, not to mention a PR nightmare." I gritted my teeth, steeling my resolve. "So be it. We'll fight this like we've fought everything else Derek's thrown our way, with the truth on our side." The ensuing legal battle was nothing short of a circus, a spectacle of mudslinging and personal attacks that played out in the public eye. Derek's lawyers painted him as a tragic figure, a devoted family man, driven to desperate measures by a cold, neglectful wife. I scoffed at the absurd notion, but the accusations stung nonetheless. How dare he try to twist the narrative, to rewrite history, and absolve himself of his own despicable actions? In the end, though, facts proved far more potent than fiction. With the mountain of evidence we'd amassed, financial records, witness testimonies, even Derek's own incriminating messages, his flimsy case crumbled like a house of cards. The final nail in the coffin came when Marissa took the stand. Faced with the prospect of perjury charges, she sang like a canary, spilling every sordid detail of her affair with Derek and their conspiracy to defraud my company. I'll never forget the look on Derek's face as Marissa delivered her damning testimony, his mask of righteous indignation melting away to reveal the sniveling coward beneath. In that moment, he knew he was beaten, his last desperate gambit thwarted. When the verdict finally came down, it was a resounding victory for our side. Derek's lawsuit was dismissed, and he was ordered to pay exorbitant legal fees and damages. But that wasn't the end of his humiliation. As I left the courthouse, flanked by Alex and a throng of reporters, Derek emerged from the building, his head hung in defeat. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred burning in his gaze. "You won't get away with this," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll make sure you pay for what you've done, even if it's the last thing I do." A mirthless chuckle escaped my lips as I regarded the pathetic shell of a man before me. "You're the one who's going to pay, Derek, for the rest of your miserable life." With that, I turned on my heel and strode away, leaving him to stew in the wreckage of his own making. The war was over, and I had emerged victorious, but at what cost? As the celebrations died down and the dust settled, I found myself alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline. What should have been a moment of triumph felt hollow somehow, tainted by the bitter aftertaste of revenge. Had it all been worth it? The lies, the deception, the scorched earth tactics? Or had I lost a piece of myself along the way, sacrificed on the altar of vindication? A quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that perhaps there was another way, a path that didn't involve sinking to Derek's level of depravity. But it was too late for such musings now. The die had been cast, and there was no going back. All I could do was soldier on, rebuild what had been broken, and pray that the hollow ache in my chest would eventually fade. Derek and Marissa had been vanquished, but at what price? Only time would tell if the cost of my vengeance was one I could truly stomach. In the weeks following my courtroom triumph over Derek's petty lawsuit, an uneasy truce settled over the battlefield. The war may have been won, but the scars ran deep for both sides. I threw myself into the task of rebuilding, working tirelessly to restore my company's tarnished reputation and repair the damage wrought by Derek's deception. With each small victory, a new client, a positive press mention, a rising stock price, the hollow ache in my chest began to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. Derek, on the other hand, had well and truly fallen from grace. His once glittering career lay in ruins, the mighty Titan reduced to a cautionary tale. I caught wind of his sordid downfall through the grapevine. No reputable firm would touch him, his reputation forever tainted by his criminal convictions. As for Marissa, well, let's just say karma has a way of evening the scales. It was a crisp autumn morning when Alex strode into my office, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "You'll never guess what fresh hell our favorite dysfunctional duo has landed themselves in," he announced, settling into the chair opposite my desk. I arched an eyebrow, equal parts intrigued and wary. "Do I even want to know?" Alex's grin widened as he slid a folder across the desk. "See for yourself." I flipped it open, my eyes widening as I scanned the contents. "You can't be serious." "As a heart attack," Alex confirmed. "Derek and Marissa are being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, you name it. Seems our little whistleblower friend was just the tip of the iceberg." A bitter chuckle escaped my lips as I digested the news. "I never thought I'd see the day." "Well, believe it, sister," Alex crowed. "Those two snakes are finally getting the book thrown at them. Hard." In the days that followed, the sordid details of Derek and Marissa's far-reaching criminal enterprise trickled out, each revelation more shocking than the last. They'd been living a double life, using my company as a front to funnel illicit funds, evade taxes, and line their own pockets. The evidence was damning, overwhelming, and this time there was no wiggle room. No legal loopholes for Derek's team of shysters to exploit. He and Marissa were well and truly boxed in, the walls closing in around them. I'll never forget the day they were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, a pathetic sight to behold. Derek, once so poised and confident, hung his head in shame, his expensive suit rumpled and disheveled. Marissa, for her part, maintained a haughty air of defiance, but I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. The trial was little more than a formality, a public crucifixion to lay bare their myriad sins. Witness after witness took the stand, each more damaging than the last, until the weight of their guilt became too massive to deny. When the verdict finally came down, guilty on all counts, a weight lifted from my shoulders. It was over, truly and finally over. Derek and Marissa's twisted game of deceit and betrayal had been blown wide open, their misdeeds exposed for the world to see. As they were led away in chains, Marissa caught my eye, her gaze burning with impotent rage. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Here were two souls so consumed by greed and hubris that they'd sacrificed everything, their reputations, their freedom, their very souls. Derek, on the other hand, refused to meet my gaze, his eyes downcast in bitter resignation. The mighty had well and truly fallen, brought low by his own avarice and depravity. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the media circus died down, I found myself standing atop the rubble of our once idyllic lives, a victor surveying the hard-won battlefield. It was finally over. But as I looked out over the smoldering wreckage, I couldn't help but wonder, at what cost had this victory come? What parts of myself had I sacrificed in pursuit of vengeance? And was it all truly worth it in the end? Only time would tell, I supposed, as I turned my back on the past and strode forward into an uncertain future. The war was won, but the scars would linger. In the months following Derek and Marissa's dramatic downfall, an uneasy calm settled over my life. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a strange, unsettling calm in its wake. With the legal battles and PR firestorms firmly in the rearview mirror, I found myself adrift, unmoored from the singular purpose that had driven me for so long. Vengeance had been my guiding star, my reason for breathing, and now that it had been achieved, I felt oddly hollow, untethered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the immediate aftermath of Derek and Marissa's sentencing, a wave of relief washed over me. The nightmare was finally over, the demons that had haunted me for so long vanquished. I could breathe again, live again, free from the weight of their betrayal. Or so I thought. The first few weeks passed in a blur of celebration and congratulations. Alex threw a raucous party at his place, a veritable who's who of the city's legal elite in attendance, all eager to toast the downfall of the dastardly duo. I plastered on a smile and made the rounds, accepting drinks and backslaps with practiced grace. But underneath the veneer of polite socialization, a part of me felt off, out of place, like an interloper at my own victory party. As the weeks stretched into months, that sense of disconnection only deepened. Logically, I knew I should have been over the moon. I'd not only survived Derek's betrayal but emerged victorious, my reputation and company intact. But the nagging feeling persisted. Like a tiny voice whispering in the back of my mind, was it really a victory if it had cost me a piece of my soul? I tried to lose myself in work, throwing every ounce of my energy into rebuilding my company's battered public image. New initiatives were launched, charitable foundations established, all in the name of scrubbing the stain left by Derek's misdeeds. And yet, no matter how many 16-hour days I pulled, how many millions I funneled into good PR, that empty ache lingered, a constant companion I couldn't seem to shake. It all came to a head one night as I sat alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline. A half-empty bottle of scotch sat on my desk, the amber liquid swirling in the glass clutched in my hand. A soft rap at the door roused me from my reverie. "Come in," I called out, not bothering to turn around. "Working late again, I see." Alex's familiar drawl reached my ears as he settled into the chair opposite my desk. "You know, they make these newfangled things called vacations these days. Might want to look into one." I huffed out a mirthless chuckle, swirling the contents of my glass. "You know me, Alex. No rest for the wicked and all that." He was silent for a beat, studying me with those perceptive eyes of his. "You don't seem terribly celebratory for someone who just took down public enemy number one." I sighed, finally meeting his gaze. I don't know, Alex. I should be over the moon, right? Derek and Marissa are behind bars, my company's back on track. But I trailed off, struggling to put the gnawing disquiet into words. But something's still eating at you, he finished, giving me a knowing look. You got your revenge, Elena. The question is, was it worth it? His words hung in the air, heavy and laden with implication. Was it worth it? The lies, the deception, the scorched earth campaign that had nearly consumed me? In that moment, the weight of everything I'd sacrificed in pursuit of vengeance came crashing down around me. The person I'd allowed myself to become, the moral lines I'd crossed, had it truly been a fair trade for seeing Derek punished? The bitter taste of self-loathing flooded my mouth, and I slammed my glass down with a trembling hand. No, it wasn't worth it. The admission hung between us, raw and painful. After a long, weighty silence, Alex spoke up, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Then it's time to leave the past in the past, my friend. Time to start over, to become the person you want to be, not the one forged in the fires of revenge. His words rang true, a clarion call amidst the storm of self-doubt that had consumed me for so long. It was time to let go, to shed the burdens of the past and step into the light. A fragile smile tugged at my lips as I met Alex's gaze, the first sparks of hope flickering to life in my chest. You're right, I whispered, the weight already beginning to lift from my shoulders. It's time for a new beginning. The road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges and inner demons to conquer, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt a sense of purpose unclouded by rage or thirst for retribution. It was time to be reborn, to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of my own making. Derek and Marissa's betrayal may have broken me once, but I was determined to emerge from the crucible stronger, wiser, my soul intact. A new chapter was beginning, and this time, the pen was firmly in my own hand.